of that and the rest of British politics on Bloomberg Westminster at 12 noon UK time. Today we're going to be speaking to the Labour MP, Taiwo Watemi, and we'll get a take on the government's handling of the virus crisis with the former advisor to the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, Joey Jones. You can catch all that live on London DAB, or you can download the podcast on Apple Music or your preferred radio app later.
Meanwhile, in top corporate news, Renault is looking to defuse a strike at its factory in northern France. The car maker says that it has no plans to shut the site, but the action erupted after the company announced a sweeping cost-cutting plan last week. It includes a reduction of around 14,600 jobs around the world. Talks with unions about the future of Renault's northern sites are set to get underway now tomorrow.
And some more corporate news breaking across the terminal in the last few moments. Mediobanca has risen their 14% on. Their shares have risen 14% on Del Vecchio's plans to boost a stake in them. Del Vecchio is asking approval to boost its Mediobanca stake by up to 20%. Del Vecchio's Delfin has asked the BOI to allow them to raise their stake in Mediobanca. So Italian financial news. Now, let's get the latest in global news with Leanne Gerrans. And Leanne, you begin with what's going on in the US.
Yes, good morning, Roger. Protests continue to rage across the United States following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow reports from San Francisco.
Curfews are in place in San Francisco and San Jose as violence continues nationwide into the early hours of this morning. In Colorado, police fired tear gas at demonstrators while fires were started near to the White House in Washington. With many states hoping to reopen their economies this week, there's concerns the close proximity of protesters could spark a new outbreak of the deadly coronavirus that's already caused more than 100,000 deaths in the US. In San Francisco, Ed Ludlow, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The US is planning an expanded G7 meeting in autumn. President Donald Trump told reporters he would also like to invite leaders from Russia, Australia, India and South Korea. He called the current setup outdated. The inclusion of Russia is likely to be the most controversial move. The country was suspended from what was then the G8 when it annexed Crimea back in 2014. In the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus first emerged, officials say for the first time in 2 months, they have not found a single case of asymptomatic infections. Bloomberg's Sharon Chen reports.
Of the 60,000 people that were tested on Sunday, the Municipal Health Commission said that no one was found to be carrying the virus without exhibiting symptoms. It's in the process of testing the entire population of 11 million people. And the mass testing is helping it to track down and isolate people who are carrying the disease. In Beijing, Sharon Chen, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And in Brazil, the number of coronavirus cases continues to increase. The country's now surpassed Spain and France to become the state with the fifth largest death toll, but is the second to the US in the number of virus cases. Meanwhile, the health ministry has said the curve of cases was still growing, suggesting there is no sign of the pandemic slowing. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Now, some long-awaited sports news for fans. Here's the morning sports wrap-up with William Essler.
Professional sport can resume in the UK from today, with horse racing at Newcastle set to be the first event. On Saturday, the government announced domestic competitive events behind closed doors would be allowed as part of Phase 3 of their easing of coronavirus lockdown measures. The EFL are aiming to restart the championship season on the 20th of June and complete the playoffs by the end of July. They say it's important to stay in sync with the Premier League, which will resume on the 17th of next month. The EFL have also agreed to consider allowing the use of 5 substitutes in the remaining games. And 2 Formula 1 races are set to go ahead at Silverstone this summer. It's understood the government will give team personnel an exemption from the 14-day quarantine period. However, they must submit a detailed plan of their movements and whereabouts for approval. The F1 season is set to start in Austria on the 5th of July.
And that was William Essler with the news about sport that's actually happening. That's a bit of a first. Anyway, coming up on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, protests erupt across America. Racial tensions fueling violence in dozens of cities just as the country starts to revive its economy after the virus pandemic. We'll bring you the details of that and what it might mean for the US economy as it does try to revive, and what President Trump's response has been and what it might mean for him in November's election. This is Daybreak Europe. This is
For the Jewish Communal Fund, Noel Spiegel, former senior partner with Deloitte & Touche and past JCF president, discusses the advantages of a donor-advised fund over a private foundation.
There's a lot involved in having a private foundation. You need to engage attorneys, you need to engage accountants, file tax returns. At JCF, all of that is done for you. You don't have to get involved in anything other than making your contribution to your fund and then determining which grants that you want to make.
A JCF fund may be opened with a minimum $5,000 contribution of cash or appreciated securities and can be used as an alternative to or together with a private foundation.
If you have a foundation, you have to list all of the contributions that you made. Potentially anybody, because the information is public, can find out exactly which organizations a foundation has made charitable contributions to.
Let JCF simplify your philanthropy and protect your privacy. Learn more about JCF's private client group at jcfny.org.
Take the Bond Challenge. Use the free Interactive Brokers Bond Scanner to search their deep availability of U.S. government securities, 38,000 global corporate bonds, and 850,000 municipals. IBKR passes through the highest of all bids and lowest of all offers received at the electronic venues it accesses. We do not widen spreads, apply hidden fees, or mark up quotes. How many basis points does your current broker keep? Find out at ibkr.com/bonds.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's David Inglis.
The world is waiting and also watching as biotech companies are racing towards a coronavirus vaccine. Now, these companies face huge profits if they succeed, one of which, we're talking about Novavax, and have a look at the company's stock. Charge this one to hindsight, by the way. There we go. So the company's now started testing it on people, and the company has seen, as quite evidence here, it's quite a massive stock surge here. We spoke with the CEO, Stan Erck, earlier.
Like the other vaccine manufacturers, we are all going as fast as we possibly can. And this is, as U.S. government set up a warp speed program, we're using warp speed. If we go into, as I say, our expectation is we'll go into a phase 2 trial, but the phase 2 trial will be designed to be a phase 2/3, so that you can actually see efficacy. And the expectation is that we'll do it in multiple countries. We'll do it in Australia, U.S., and likely in a couple other countries in August. And by somewhere in the October-November timeframe, we would expect to be able to see efficacy. And that could lead governments, the FDA and the EMA in Europe, to conclude that the vaccine might be deployable.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings.
And to normal.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, we are seeing European stock markets advancing. Now, there are a lot of markets closed today for Whit Monday. So the DAX, for instance, is not trading today. But we are seeing the FTSE up 1.4% and the CAC 40 up 1.5%. The Stock 600 gaining 0.9%. But do bear in mind that there are low volumes because of those holidays across Europe. But a couple of stock specifics to keep an eye on include AB Foods here in London, gaining 3.5%. 2.5% after it said it's working to reopen most of its stores by the 15th of June. Currently, it's trading in 112 stores. Ted Baker, on the other hand, plunging more than 18% after saying full-year revenues came in lower than expected and said it will try to raise £90 million via a share placing. We are seeing US futures pointing slightly higher following a similarly positive trading day in Asia, where the Hang Seng has rallied 3.4% after President Trump on Friday stopped short of sanctions on China over its new security law for Hong Kong. So the riots in the US over the death of George Floyd have been adding to the dollar's recent weakness. That decline now down 0.4% according to the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. The yen, on the other hand, adding to 3 weeks of gains, currently up 0.2 at 107.6. We are seeing the yen a bit firmer today. The onshore currently trading at 7.12 after manufacturing data showed the economic recovery in China continues. That data boosting trade-related currencies, the Korean won, Aussie and Kiwi dollars all gaining. We're seeing sterling and the euro both bid. Sterling currently at 124. 10-year treasury yields up a basis point at 66 basis points. 10-year bund yields gaining 3 basis points to negative 42. 10-year gilt yields up 2 basis points to 21 basis points. We are seeing gold trading higher, $1,740 a troy ounce, and WTI slightly weaker after 5 weeks of gains at $35 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Len Garrett with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. Let's start here in England, where primary schools are starting to reintroduce more students as lockdown measures ease today. But a survey suggests half of parents might not send their children back. Children in reception years 1 and 6 are able to return, with many having been out of school for 10 weeks. In the Japanese capital, Tokyo, students are also returning to college today. Fitness gyms, saunas and cinemas are among businesses reopening their doors after nearly 2 months under a loose lockdown. Japan's been slowly reopening economic activity across the country after a state of emergency to tackle the coronavirus was lifted last week. And finally, senior Facebook employees are criticizing the CEO. They went on Twitter to express their unhappiness that Mark Zuckerberg is not taking action on comments President Trump posted on Facebook. The president posted a message saying, quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Zuckerberg says he did not put warnings on that post because people need to know if the government is planning military action. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans. Well, picking up on your story about President Donald Trump, not his tweets, but the protests more broadly, because, of course, they've continued to rage across America over the weekend following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Demonstrators are still on the streets of several cities, including Washington, after a weekend of violent clashes. The outpouring of anger threatens the post-virus economic recovery that has already been pretty fraught with risk. Let's bring in Bloomberg senior editor Derek Warbank, who's been following this story for us. Look, it's shocking in the US, it's shocking around the world to see the depth of anger and people out on the streets. Bring us up to speed with what the situation is now in America.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me start by the catalyst here. The catalyst here was that George Floyd, a man in Minneapolis, black man in Minneapolis, it should be noted, was stopped by police. They had an arrest going on, and at some point in that, Mr. Floyd ended up on the ground with a police officer's knee on his neck, and several minutes later, he was unresponsive and later pronounced dead. That's the catalyst. That's the immediate catalyst for all of this that began with very large protests and some violent actions in Minneapolis, and now has spread all across the United States to pretty much every single major city, including, as you mentioned, Washington, D.C., where last night law enforcement and protesters were clashing within a block of the White House itself. Literally one historic church that faces the White House. There was a fire in the basement. People broke in and set a fire there, and that's literally how close to the White House some of this is getting. So that's the situation across the United States as people went to bed. And I think you're absolutely right. People around the world are watching this with some major concern, wondering what in the world's going on.
Yeah, and also, Derek, I mean, this comes in the context of the virus, which has already really damaged the US economy. A lot of unemployment out there, a lot of people not sure if their jobs will exist. Is this really underneath what's fueling it, do you think? Is it more than just the incident in Minneapolis?
The incident in Minneapolis was a spark on a lot of dry wood. There have been a bunch of things that have sort of come out in recent in recent weeks that were sort of race and police kind of related. But if you're sitting there talking about race and policing in the United States, you're looking at a really, really long list of some difficulties, and that is kind of the sparks on which it was set. Now, as you mentioned, the virus is a really smart point, because a lot of people in the United States are saying, hold on a second, it's really hard to socially distance in the middle of a protest or in the middle of a riot, as some of these have turned into. And indeed, there is some looming concern that people are, that this will spark an increase in coronavirus cases and deaths. And the U.S., of course, leads the world in confirmed fatalities from coronavirus. The other thing is that with the economy kind of on pause in a lot of places, it's starting to be Monday morning. When the U.S. wakes up, it's Monday morning, and people, a lot of them, don't have a work to go back to.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's a combination of a number of factors. Thank you so much for joining us, Bloomberg Senior Editor Derek Wallbank. I note, of course, that China, it's political too, the reaction to the rioting, because China is trolling the US over the protests, sort of needling President Trump and the Trump administration about that in the tit-for-tat escalation of tensions between Washington and Beijing also. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe live from London.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Lockdowns are being lifted in some parts of the country and in some areas overseas as well. Nevada casinos reopen later this week. Resorts in Las Vegas have been closed since March, resulting in unemployment for a third of area workers. Reopening plans include social distancing, temperature checks, and masks handed out at business entrances. But now that lockdowns are ending, social unrest shutdowns are kicking in. Amazon is shutting some hubs near protests and scaling back deliveries in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland. And Target, headquartered in Minneapolis, is expanding temporary closures. Apple closed some stores yesterday and cited health and safety concerns. This could be a rough summer for the insurance industry. It could be the most dangerous storm season since 2005. And stocks begin the month at or near their best level since the COVID-19 pandemic hit the U.S. in March. The market was higher in May for the second month in a row. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
How long? How much? How many? Financial, policy, and medical experts are working on answers 24/7.
What about public debt?
We are listening to those experts 24/7.
Is the Fed effectively widening this wealth gap with its programs?
Because you want answers too.
What's the most important? The trillions in stimulus, the economy's reopening, or the infections curve bending?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
When the market is unpredictable, BAM gives you certainty. In the face of volatility and illiquidity, BAM-insured municipal bonds deliver default protection, value preservation, and a durable AA rating from S&P. BAM's insurance protects against everything that causes a default, including natural disasters, financial fraud, pension issues, and economic disruption, like the one we're experiencing right now. BAM. Build America Mutual. Ask your broker about BAM-insured municipal bonds.
Imagine. At Wix, we put customer safety at the heart of everything we do. But right now, that doesn't just mean goggles, steel toe caps, and yellow helmets. It means 2-meter distances, paying by card, and safety screens at checkout. So whether you want to shop with us in-store, click and collect, or have your order delivered to your home, let's do it right safely. Wix.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs. Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Stay on top of everything happening in the pro wrestling universe with the Body Slamming podcasts on TuneIn. For passionate recaps of the most recent SmackDown to a pro wrestler's perspective on life and culture at large, search sports and scroll down to the world of wrestling to listen.
Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective podcast.
What about Giannis Antetokounmpo? He is going to be eligible to sign a Supermax extension, which we were projecting to be worth $240 million this summer. Well, if the salary cap drops, and even if he's wonderfully happy in Milwaukee, it may make no sense for him to sign when he can just wait a year and wait for the revenues to recover and then lock in.
Subscribe to Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective. Search the Hoop Collective to listen.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic Game Replays to start listening.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
A very good morning from London. It's 8:30 a.m. this morning. A very good morning. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Roger Hearing, and you're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
So, in terms of the markets then, Roger, actually it's another up day after a very strong month for European equities last month. So we start June with a 1% gain for the Euro Stoxx 600, 1.5% gain for the FTSE 100. Xetra DAX and a number of other markets are shut across Europe because it is Whit Monday, so it's a holiday in Germany, Denmark, Austria, Hungary and others. Having said that, we also did see strong gains for the Hang Seng because President Donald Trump held back from stronger sanctions against Beijing that he had seemed to threaten over the treatment of Hong Kong. Didn't seem to be transpire in the speech on Friday, or at least up until now. S&P 500 E-mini futures are up by 0.3%. And as I say, the Hang Seng gained this morning 3.3%. In terms of the bond markets, we anticipate, of course, the ECB decision this Thursday. That could be absolutely critical for Europe. A lot of expectation that we'll see a lot more stimulus added by Christine Lagarde and her team. Italian BTP trade at 1.45%, so down by 2 basis points. US yields at 66 basis points. As for the FX space, Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index weakens 0.4%. The pound stronger 0.5%. The euro is also stronger 0.3% this morning. Small declines in crude futures as we look to potentially an OPEC Plus meeting that may be brought forward a few days to this week. Those are the markets.
Right, let's have a look at some of today's top stories. Now, violence has erupted in dozens of US cities following the killing of George Floyd. The demonstrations are already having an impact on an economy that's reeling from the pandemic. Amazon's scaling back deliveries and adjusting routes in a number of cities, including Chicago and Los Angeles. And Apple has said it's temporarily shutting the majority of its US stores, citing the health and safety of its employees.
And when it comes to the clash between the US and China, China and Hong Kong are pushing back against President Donald Trump. The city's administration says that the threats from the president over the city's trading status are unjustified and that Beijing is within its rights to pursue new national security laws. Meanwhile, the People's Daily, China's Communist Party mouthpiece, wrote that threats from the White House are, quote, doomed to fail after the US announced on Friday that it would end Hong Kong's special trading relationship and stop short of tougher sanctions.
And here, the government's coming under pressure from its own scientists to show caution in easing the lockdown. Bloomberg's Charles Capel has the story.
The government says the coronavirus is being controlled in the UK and has eased lockdown measures as a result. Starting today, it is reopening some stores, opening schools and relaxing social distancing. But even the government's own scientists have questioned the safety of these relaxations, while more than 20 other scientists wrote to the Observer newspaper saying the government is at risk of losing public trust, and as a result, their compliance. In London, Charles Capel, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
And finally, OPEC and its allies are set to discuss a short extension of current output cuts. Bloomberg has learned that the cartel is considering bringing forward its next meeting by a few days to the 4th of June. The group may extend curbs for 1 to 3 months, a delegate told us. As the market is moving so fast, the preference is for short-term measures.
Now, the head of economic transformation for South Africa's ruling ANC party has proposed a range of measures to bolster the economy there. These range from encouraging the central bank to finance infrastructure spending to the creation of a state bank and pharmaceutical company. Well, earlier, Bloomberg's Anna Edwards spoke to the Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Chanyago, and asked him whether we can expect more monetary stimulus.
We had built buffers as the monetary authority. Inflation is not an immediate concern. We had always aimed to anchor inflation at 4.5%, which is the midpoint of our inflation target range. And we expect that this year, inflation will average 3.6%. So that gives us some monetary policy space. But what we have seen is that since the beginning of the year, we have provided monetary relief of 275 basis points. But that 275 basis points couldn't be felt because the economy was under lockdown. So as the economy reopens, we are then going to have to reassess, look at the evidence that is coming to see what the impact of that monetary policy relief is. And should it be necessary, we stand ready to deploy any of our tools in accordance with our mandate to provide relief to the South African economy.
And Governor, when do you think then that the economy will benefit fully from the 275 basis points of easing that you've already done year to date?
We are almost making policy in the dark because there is a lot of data that we can't have because the statistical agency was also under lockdown, and as a matter of course, they had even postponed the release of some of the key indicators, including the gross domestic product. And as the economy opens up, we would have to assess. We do have a meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee scheduled in July, and hopefully by the time we get there, we would be having enough data that will enable us to assess what other policy adjustments we would have to make.
Okay, and when it comes to the role that the central bank is playing at the moment, Governor, we have seen reports over the weekend from the ANC suggesting that some parts of the ANC plan to expand the role of the central bank to involve the central bank in financing infrastructure and funding the development finance institutions, the DFIs. Are you aware of an expanded role for the central bank in those areas?
As a matter of policy, we do not respond to political parties. The mandate of the Reserve Bank is enshrined in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, and it is spelled out as price stability in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth in the Republic. I think that it is actually important that as the discourse about the role of central banks takes place around the world, and South Africa is no exception, there are limits to what central banks can do. They are institutions designed with a particular responsibility in society, and that it is important that central banks, which are institutions that make decisions about lending and borrowing, be allowed to stay in that space, and that central banks are not dragged into spending decisions. Spending decisions are decisions of the public representatives, and central banks, it's very important that they stay in their lane in accordance with their mandate. And there is no doubt this discourse is taking place around the world, but I think that it would be wrong to drag central banks into making spending decisions because they are run by technocrats and not by public representatives.
And that was the South African Reserve Bank Governor, Lesetja Kganyago, speaking to Bloomberg's Anna Edwards.
Okay, let's get all the latest now in global news headlines. It's Bloomberg's Leanne Garrett. Good morning.
Caroline, good morning and thank you. Violence has erupted in dozens of U.S. cities following the death of George Floyd, a black man from Minneapolis who died in police custody. In Washington, D.C., police fired tear gas into crowds. Protests have ranged from peaceful marches to setting fire to police cars and government buildings, and overnight curfews have largely been ignored too. President Donald Trump is blaming the riots on Antifa, a movement of left-wing activists. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the U.S. has no basis to treat Hong Kong more favorably than mainland China. This comes after Beijing passed a bill to extend security laws to the territory. Bloomberg's Karen Lee reports.
Underlining the growing tension between the world's two largest economies as pro-democracy protests flare up again in the financial hub. Pompeo told Fox News Sunday that China's leadership had broken its promise of preserving Hong Kong's autonomy after the country's legislature approved a plan for sweeping national security legislation aimed at quelling the unrest. In Hong Kong, Karen Lee, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The U.S. is planning an expanded G7 meeting in autumn. President Donald Trump told reporters he would also like to invite leaders from Russia, Australia, India and South Korea to the summit. He called the current setup outdated. The inclusion of Russia is likely to be the most controversial move. The country was suspended from what was in the G8 when it annexed Crimea back in 2014. And in Brazil, the number of coronavirus cases continues to increase. The country's now surpassed Spain and France to become the state with the fifth largest death toll, but is the second to the US in the number of virus cases. Meanwhile, the health ministry there has said the increase of cases was still growing. This suggests there is no sign of the pandemic slowing. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Garrett, with all the world news. Coming up next on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, we're going to speak to Mark Oswald, who is Chief Economist and Global Strategist at ADM Investor Services. Roger and I have been trying to pass all morning what is driving these markets. There are so many big stories, from US riots to Hong Kong. This is Bloomberg.
You're fierce. You take care of business and don't hold back. Taking care of your health shouldn't be any different. You know when something's off. Don't ignore symptoms like fatigue, joint pain, and rashes. Listen to your body. It could be lupus. We're here to help you take control. Learn how at BeFierceTakeControl.org. Brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of America and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Are you looking for senior care for your mom or dad but don't know where to start? Hi, I'm Joan London with A Place for Mom. Nobody knows your parent or loved one better than you, and nobody knows senior living better than the experts at A Place for Mom. It's a free service, and we've helped thousands of families find the right place for their mom or dad. There's a place for answers, A Place for Mom. Call today.
Call A Place for Mom at 1-800-391-1755. That's 1-800-391-1755.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's BABBEL.com.
NJIT. TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier. That also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is...
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn. With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then, whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Buckle up, race fans.
NASCAR is back in the driver's seat.
And you can cut straight to the action here.
With the Performance Racing Network on TuneIn, you can hear PRN's live coverage of some of this year's top events.
As NASCAR's top drivers, Kevin Harvick,
Clint Boyer, and more get back on the track.
Search Performance Racing Network to listen and see upcoming races.
It's headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from London. I'm Sandra Kilhoff with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Now, we are seeing European stock markets largely in the green, with the CAC 40 and the FTSE gaining more than 1.5%. The stock 600 currently up 0.9%. The DAX closed for Whit Monday, along with quite a few other markets in Europe, so do keep an eye on that. As I said, US futures also in the green. It follows a positive trading day in Asia, where the Hang Seng has rallied more than 3%. Investors there really taking heart from the fact that President Trump stopped short of sanctions on China over its new security law for Hong Kong. Now, we are seeing riots in the US, though, adding to the dollar's recent declines, now down more than 0.5% according to the Bloomberg dollar spot index. Instead, we are seeing the yen gaining 0.3% to 107.5. We are seeing the onshore yuan a bit firmer today. This after manufacturing PMI showed the economic recovery in China is continuing. The onshore currently up 0.2% at 7.11 now. Sterling and the euro both bid up about 0.5% each, with sterling above 124 now. 10-year treasury yields gaining 2 basis points to 76 basis points. We are seeing 10-year bund yields up 4 basis points to negative 41. 10-year gilt yields gaining 3 basis points to 21 basis points. So a bit of a risk-on mood there, moving through government bonds. If we take a look at gold, also trading higher, currently up 0.5% at $1,738 a troy ounce. Finally, oil slipping a bit, coming off those 5 weeks of gains. WTI down 0.3% at $35 a barrel. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Garrins with more on what's going on around the world.
Sandra, thank you. In the Chinese city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus first appeared, mass testing may have eradicated the virus. The city, which has tested 60,000 people, says it has found no asymptomatic cases for the first time. Officials are planning on testing the whole population of 11 million people to guard against a resurgence of cases. India is moving to a phased lifting of its lockdown despite recording a record number of daily coronavirus cases. Shopping centres, restaurants and places of worship will reopen next Monday as the government attempts to reboot the economy. India has the most coronavirus infections in Asia. And finally, 2 American astronauts have boarded the International Space Station from the SpaceX capsule. It marks the first time humans have travelled to orbit on a commercial spacecraft. It is also the first time American astronauts have flown into space from U.S. soil since the shuttle program ended in 2011. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Garrins. This is Bloomberg. Roger.
Leanne, thanks for that. Now, equities have been moving higher today as investors weigh the riots in the US against the relief there certainly seems to be in Asia anyway over President Trump's on Friday stopping short of imposing tough sanctions over China's new national security law for Hong Kong. So what is driving the markets? What's the main motivator? Let's bring in Mark Ostwald. He's chief economist and global strategist with ADM Investor Services. Mark, good morning to you. Thanks for being with us. Do you get a sense that basically they've priced in Asia a certain element of risk in regard to the China-US relationship and are happy to go with what is, and right now they're not that worried about what's going on in the US?
Certainly, I mean, this disconnect that we've seen in evidence for the past 2 months between economic realities, social realities, and on the other hand, market performance remains very much in place and very much driven by central banks, by the fact that we've got low interest rates, and low interest rates are going to be, low interest rates, super low interest rates, and we're likely to have them. If you look at market implied policy rates, basically no one's expecting anything in the way of a tightening move by any major central bank for the next 3 years. Therefore, the returns in fixed income basically are unacceptable. And people make a charge for risk, particularly as they're looking at the easing of lockdown measures. They're looking at some of the PMIs and putting an optimistic spin on them. I think it's more a second derivative element on that, i.e. they're looking at the rebound and saying, well, that's good, even if one looks at the actual data and says, well, actually, these all imply pretty much, even the China Caixin manufacturing PMI doesn't imply much in the way of growth, but it was better than expected. But they all still imply a sharp contraction in Q2. So we are riding a lot of hope about a rebound in Q3. There are a lot of tripping stones, I would say. Mr. Trump is not known for consistency. So on Friday he may have been less aggressive than some had feared. But that's not to say that won't turn around if it suits him in terms of the fact that this is an election year in the United States, and he is still very much determined to win that election.
Yeah, absolutely. But how will his chances, I suppose, be affected by the riots, the anger that is felt across the US, and more importantly, I suppose, for us, aside from the human impact, the impact on the US economy from this social unrest? And, it's going to be massively important if we go into a changed world post-coronavirus that is also looking for greater equity in society.
Yeah, indeed, and I think this is the big problem. We're making assumptions that a lot of the job losses that we've seen, and they've been spectacular in the United States, as we're likely to be confirmed by the claims data and indeed the monthly data that we get at the end of the week. The assumption is that most of those jobs will be reinstated. I have very serious doubts about it, both because corporate profits basically are likely to take a prolonged hit, and therefore companies need to save money. And one of the main ways they save money is by having less staff. And, we're making assumptions about how, that the demand which dropped off the face of a cliff during the end of Q1 and Q2 will suddenly re-emerge in Q3. I think with all the uncertainty, without a vaccine out there, and now with this civil unrest that you've got in the US, particularly as it's so violent, how is that going to make consumers feel? Well, I have my doubts whether they're going to feel that it's everything's going back to normal. And there's going to have to be a meeting of minds between Main Street and Wall Street, and that just happens to be the analogy of the US, but that applies everywhere else.
Well, indeed. In fact, let's apply that to Europe, because it's a very key week in Europe at the moment. We've got the ECB expected to do a fair bit of buying this week, and some suggestion if they don't get out there and spend, there's going to be some disappointment. We also, of course, are moving into a phase where there seems to be, at least on the table, a kind of deal, a plan to try and help the European economy. And the euro is looking a little bit stronger, particularly as the dollar seems to suffer. So what's your sense of where the European economy is going at the moment?
I think in terms of the European economy, obviously the EU Commission proposal on whether it's ratified, whether it's watered down, and most importantly, whether it's implemented quickly. The speed at which it's implemented is very important. 750 billion is not very much in Eurozone GDP terms, and this is spread across the whole of the EU, not just the Eurozone. The more that there are delays as people try to water it down, they try to get their share of it, the more ineffective it will be, because the current devastation, I think is the proper word, of the Eurozone economies will continue to exact a very high price in economic terms. Therefore, that package is very important, and whatever the ECB does, you can guarantee that Madame Lagarde will say, well, whatever we do in terms of ensuring financial stability, the most important thing is that politicians step up here. And this must be delivered, and it must be delivered very, very quickly.
What risk if it isn't?
Quite substantial. I mean, I think this is my concern here, because as we go through the year, and this applies pretty much across the board, we're already seeing insolvencies rise. We're not quite at the peak of the 2000 we saw in 2009, but we're seeing that everywhere. It's all very well doing risk on in a low default rate environment, but as we see default rates pick up, so we are going to be effectively reality checked. And there is, all the central bank liquidity doesn't make companies solvent. Yeah. And this is the bridge, the central banks have got to hope that the recovery is quite swift, because otherwise that will be a very big problem.
If you would, on the UK economy, we're also expecting quite a bit of spending, probably coming from Rishi Sunak, and already they've spent so much. Where do you think the UK economy is right now?
I think the UK economy is perhaps in a slightly more dangerous place, simply because the decision to start easing down a lot of the lockdown measures comes against the backdrop of the track and trace systemology in the UK being untested, the infection rate being miles higher than, say, most of the other European countries where we're seeing easing. And then we've got all the Brexit-related uncertainties, with this week being obviously absolutely critical in terms of this next round of EU UK Brexit talks. There's been a lot of posturing ahead of it. A lot of both sides sort of saying you need to knuckle down, you need to get around to our opinion. I think that's what that was to be expected. We'll see by the end of the week what the reality is and whether they have managed to close any of the gaps. At the moment, the auspices don't look fantastic.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Mark Oswald, Chief Economist and Global Strategist with ADM Investor Services. Well, on that note, let's end with a check of the pound, which climbed 0.6% to the highest since the 11th of May. So sterling stronger. This is Bloomberg.
Pressure on. TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Neil. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season. Like the Ringer NFL show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The idea is to really hold the economy in suspended animation until we get control of this virus.
We are very much in a picture of monetary dominance.
We will get slower growth. I mean, let's not get confused about that.
We are in a national crisis. I think it is for all parties to pull together.
The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe on Bloomberg Radio.
A very good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hebker. Warm welcome to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, where we're going to take you through the markets, also bring you some top guests. Bob Parker will be joining me in a moment from Quilvest. I know that you'll want his perspective on the market and what is going on in America. Despair in the US. That's how Mark Zandi put it at Moody's Analytics. Racial injustice, inequality meets massive unemployment, the ravages of the pandemic. And a lot of sympathy felt elsewhere. Protests in London, in Manchester and Cardiff. So across the UK, despite the measures against big gatherings in the UK, people out on the street protesting with placards, Black Lives Matter. As for the top stories in the UK and Europe, well, it's about school children getting back to the classroom today. Is it too early? Criticism of the Boris Johnson government, given the infection rates in the UK. And then the anticipation around the ECB. How much money does Christine Lagarde have to put in to bond buying to satisfy the markets? That is what is up for grabs. Of course, that decision won't come until later on this week. In the markets right now, though, optimism up 0.8% on the US stock 600. Yes, because of the potential for an increased stimulus package, but also because President Trump stopped short of tough sanctions over China's new security law on Hong Kong. So it follows also the gains that we saw on the Hang Seng this morning, up by 3.4% there. The FTSE 100 gains by 1.3% this hour. Remember, the DAX is closed because it's Whit Monday. It is a holiday in Germany and across a lot of European markets, Denmark, Austria, Hungary, Norway, Switzerland, and so on. So in terms of the rest of the markets, let's look at US futures for now. The S&P 500 E-mini futures actually up by just 0.25%. They have been in negative territory in the hours that we've been on air in London, but they are positive at the moment. This after, of course, a very strong performance for both European and US equities. Last month, the US Stock 600 gained 3% for May, the best performance since 2009. And we also saw all of the US benchmarks gain, the S&P 500, the Dow Jones, both finished the month up more than 4%. The Nasdaq 6.8%. So that shows you the strength of the rebound. Will that hold, though, with these tensions domestically and internationally for the US? In the bond markets this morning, I'll give you a check there. We trade currently for Italian BTPs at 1.44%, so down 3 basis points. As for US yields, 67 basis points, so up by 1.5 basis points. Not major moves right now. In the FX space, a bit more interesting. We are weaker 0.5% on the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index right now. 1.11 for the Euro spot price, so stronger 0.4%, along with a rallying pound, 0.6% higher, 1.24 this morning on cable. That's despite the Brexit talks beginning again this week and concerns about whether there'll really be a deal between the UK and Europe. And as for the oil markets, we're down 0.3% on WTI crude futures as we potentially will see OPEC Plus gather this week a little bit earlier than anticipated. In the meantime, let's get over, now that we've had a little look at the markets, to our guest this hour, Bob Parker, who is Investment Committee member at Quilvest Wealth Management and also Senior Advisor to the International Capital Markets Association, a regular guest on the programme. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. Look, stocks are higher after President Trump on Friday stopped short of these tough sanctions, but then we have had fire and flame and looting as well as peaceful protests in the US over the weekend. What is driving markets for you?
Well, I think what is clearly driving markets is the very significant expansion in monetary policy that we have had both in America and Europe and, a number of other countries, with interest rates being cut, with very significant asset purchases, and obviously investors are going to be watching very carefully, as you mentioned, what the ECB announces this coming Thursday. So, first of all, expansion of monetary policy. Secondly, let's not forget that if you actually add up all the fiscal expansion programs that have been announced around the world, it comes to close to $9 trillion equivalent. So that fiscal expansion is also sort of supporting an expected recovery in the global economy. And, we are starting to see tentative signs of that recovery. So I think it's reasonably clear that China and most of the Asian economies had a shock in January and February, then formed a base in March, and now we are seeing this slow, and I emphasize the word slow, recovery in Asia. I think it's reasonably clear that we're seeing a base being formed in Europe and the States at the moment before we recover over the next month or two.
Okay, is the stock market then simply being fueled because of low interest rates? And that's obviously, those very low interest rates are going to continue for a long time. Is that the only driver? Is that a sensible driver?
I think, first of all, let's not forget that investors were, I think, sort of panicked in March and therefore raised significant volumes of cash, and there was a mass exodus from equity markets in March. And then in April, and following on in May, there was this sort of slow movement back by investors into what we call risk-on assets. But there is still, a very significant amount of cash sitting on the sidelines. So, yes, you're right in saying that monetary and fiscal action is supporting markets, but I also think that investors are looking through, rightly or wrongly, what is going to be a very bad period of corporate earnings growth in the second quarter and potentially the third quarter as well. And they're looking forward to better results, which I think will come through in the fourth quarter and the first half of next year. So, they're almost discounting the current bad news that we're experiencing. Now, will the equity market rally continue at the same sort of pace that we saw in April and May? I think not. I think we'll probably get back to more stable, more normal conditions, although I'm sceptical as to whether we're going to have a major reversal in markets.
Okay. Just out this morning, also Euro area manufacturing PMI figures for May coming in at 39.4, so pretty much just 0.1% worse than the preliminary number. So 39.4 is still obviously massively in contraction territory for May. How much do you think the ECB has to come up with on Thursday for markets not to be disappointed in Europe? I know I mentioned in the data check just how well European equities, much unloved, managed to perform last month.
Yes. Well, the European equities have done better than American equities in the last week or two. And that, let's be frank, European equities are very undervalued, and you used the word unloved. I think that's absolutely correct. The ECB on Thursday, I think, is going to refer to their concern about deflation risk in Europe. And if you look at the latest inflation numbers, we're close to zero. I think they're also going to be concerned about the fact that the second quarter is going to be, the numbers for the second quarter are going to be very bad, and it could well be that Eurozone GDP declines year on year by well over 10% before we get this sort of modest recovery in the third quarter. And it comes back to the fact the ECB is worried that that recovery is going to be very modest. So I think they won't cut interest rates further, but they certainly will announce, I think, a further increase in their asset purchase program. Whether that's an expansion of what they call the pandemic emergency program or whether it's just a further increase in quantitative easing. But I think probably they will reiterate that their asset purchase program, over the rest of 2020 could well be close to €1 trillion.
Yeah, an incredible sum, wouldn't it be? Thank you so much, Bob, for joining me this morning. Bob Parker, Investment Committee member at Quilvest Wealth Management. Always good to get Bob's view on the markets. A red headline crossing the terminal right now. China is said to halt some US soy imports as tensions rise between Washington and Beijing. So that if we were looking for a response from the rhetoric from President Trump last week on Friday, perhaps that's part of it. China is said to halt some US soy imports as the tensions rise. Let's get the latest now in terms of global news headlines. Bloomberg's Leanne Guerin stands by with what has been a fraught weekend in the US. Good morning.
Caroline, good morning and thank you. Violence has erupted in dozens of cities across the United States. The riots follow the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man who died in Minneapolis last week after a police officer pressed a knee into his neck more than 8 minutes. Now, for more on this, let's go live to Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, who is standing by in New York. Good morning, Anne-Marie, and thanks for joining us. Firstly, what's the latest?
Good morning, Leanne. Well into this morning, we saw protests and these unrests continue across America. This is coast to coast, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. In Washington, D.C., we saw law enforcement and protesters clash within a block of the White House. And as many of these protests started out, we saw tons throughout the weekend peacefully. Soon, a lot of them turned very violent. And you've seen, I'm sure, pictures really across the world of burning cars and looting. In New York, I saw a lot of stores start to border up their storefronts. So two things I think to keep in mind when we think about what's happening. One is that there's been a disproportionate effect of the virus on minorities. So the outrage over George Floyd's death comes as Black Americans are dealing with a disproportionately impact on their health and finances from the virus. We also have 1 in 4 Americans who had a job before the pandemic now find themselves jobless. And Mark Zandi of Moody's said, he thinks people are just realizing that their job may not be coming back and that it shows the highlights of the depth of despair in America. The second thing is, what does this mean for the economic recovery and planned reopenings? Well, some of these lockdown measures that we're supposed to lift now have to go put on pause. The looting will start to worry businesses that were looking to reopen. And also, how do you get the customers back into the shops? We know The consumer spending was off a cliff last week, a record plunge. That's 2/3 of America's economy. So that's a worry amongst consumers. And also, what does this mean for a second wave of the virus? The Atlanta mayor said, if you were out protesting, you need to go get a test for COVID. Because we see these protesters, Leanne, shoulder to shoulder, and many of the times not wearing masks. So these are a lot of concerns that we are seeing as the protests continue throughout the country.
So, Anne-Marie, as you've said, there are a lot of concerns. But what has the response been from President Trump so far?
Well, the president is blaming the protests on Democrats and as well as the leftist group. And he's really depicting himself as a strong man, a man of law and order. In Florida over the weekend, we had that SpaceX launch, and he spoke and he said he vowed to end, quote, mob violence and confront radical left criminals. On Twitter, he's also threatened protests near the White House with vicious dogs, which critics came out and said that evoked racist imagery from the civil rights protests of last century. He did offer public condolences to George Floyd and his family, though, and he promised a targeted federal investigation, but he did signal little appetite for the systemic changes that we see protesters demand. Today, though, he will be meeting with Attorney General William Barr. He's also having teleconference with a number of people, including governors, law enforcement, national security officials. So potentially more details on how the government plans to address this unrest, Leanne.
Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Holden in New York there. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date with all those details out of the US on the violence that we've seen erupting in the streets over the last few days over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg. Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans, for keeping us up to speed with the big story out of the US. Coming up next, we're going to speak to our opinion columnist, Lionel Laurent, on the possibilities of a second wave of coronavirus in Europe. This is
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
The Boston Symphony Orchestra presents BSO at Home. While you stay inside, enjoy a curated collection of archived concerts and behind-the-scenes stories from BSO musicians. BSO Homeschool provides lessons for music lovers of all ages. New performances and messages from musicians are added regularly. Enjoy these selections and much more at bso.org/at-home.
You took the first step and quit smoking, but even former smokers may still be at risk for lung cancer. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know about a new low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early. It takes only 60 seconds and could save your life. You took the first step, now take the next. Visit SaveByTheScan.org for a simple quiz to see if you're eligible and talk to your doctor about screening. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Emily Chang on Bloomberg Technology.
With so many countries under lockdown around the world, that means there has been a growing backlog of legal cases, and with courts slowly starting to reopen up, this is a challenge. Joining us to talk about the bottleneck is Sunita Bali, partner at Perkins Coie law firm. We're seeing massive court backlogs. Talk to us about what this actually means.
You know, courts are trying to balance the safety concerns for the public and court employees with the need to continue judicial operations. And one of the side effects has certainly been delays. There's been a variety of approaches taken by courts state and federal courts across the country as things continue to change rapidly and courts try to find ways to adapt to the constant changes. As you mentioned, some courts are already preparing to reopen. They're putting protective measures in place, such as requiring face coverings or taking temperatures prior to entering the courthouse. And they plan to have some proceedings go forward in business cases in person. Whereas other courts have transitioned to conducting hearings by telephone or video conference to keep things moving.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app. Or check your local cable listings.
Markets, headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Horder with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Early and especially during Asia trading when the CSI 300 closed up more than 3%, markets were focused on what President Trump didn't say. On Friday, he stopped short of identifying tough sanctions over China's new national security law for Hong Kong. But just in the last 10 minutes, we heard the Chinese government is halting some U.S. farm imports. That threatens potentially the trade deal, and we do see markets taking a bit of a leg lower. The Stock 600 now is barely up 0.5%. U.S. futures are also pointed down in the red. S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow Jones, all of this as well as America grapples with unrest throughout the weekend, and that spilled over into this evening from coast to coast. A lot of chaos as some peaceful protesters have turned violent. Over in the foreign exchange this morning, we do have all of this weighing on the Bloomberg dollar, down 0.3%. These unrest could potentially be a headwind for the dollar. The euro, though, gaining some strength this morning, 1.11 on euro dollar, especially as European economies start to reopen, and they are welcoming tourists. And oil this morning took another leg lower, potentially on that trade, the Chinese story and the trade developments. $35 on WTI crude, down more than 1%. Also, OPEC Plus may be changing the date of the meeting. We've seen this before. To this week, though, so Thursday could potentially be a very important day for the oil market. And under discussion with the group is to hold off on tapering those production cuts. That's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Garrins with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Leanne.
Good morning, Anne-Marie, and thank you. Here in the UK, the government is coming under pressure from its own scientists to show caution in easing the lockdown. More than 20 experts wrote a letter to the Observer newspaper saying public faith had been badly damaged by the Cummings saga. But Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has defended the decision to loosen restrictions, saying scientists do not always agree. In Brazil, the number of coronavirus cases continues to increase. The country's now surpassed Spain and France to become the state with the fifth largest death toll, but is second to the US in the number of virus cases. Meanwhile, the health ministry has said the curve of cases was still growing, suggesting there is no sign of the pandemic slowing. And in the Japanese capital, Tokyo, students are starting to return to college today. Fitness gyms, saunas and cinemas are among businesses reopening their doors after nearly 2 months under a loose lockdown. Japan's been slowly reopening economic activity across the country after a state of emergency to tackle the coronavirus was lifted last week. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Garrins. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
Now it's 9:20 a.m. here in London, so it's time to check in with Bloomberg Opinion. And we're joined by our opinion columnist Lionel Laurent this morning, who's been writing about the risk of a second wave of coronavirus cases in Europe. But Lionel, you're actually pretty optimistic because we're several weeks into the easing of lockdown measures in a number of European countries, and it does seem that another spike has been avoided so far.
Yes, that's true. There's plenty of caveats which we'll get into, but if you look at the numbers, it's been 3 weeks since several major countries in Europe didn't fully lift, but eased lockdowns, and we've seen people go out and about again, albeit with face masks and hand gel and all sorts of movement restrictions, but we have not seen a significant flare-up in cases or deaths, and the fact that it's been 3 weeks has actually led a lot of medical experts and biologists to actually voice their optimism that we are in a better position, whether it is society or whether the virus has changed itself to to avoid potentially a serious second wave, at least in the short term.
Yeah, the question is, I guess, is it just too soon? I mean, what happens when Europe actually starts flying again? 27, 28 countries linked by plenty of low-cost carriers.
Yes, so you make a good point in terms of the pressure on governments to reopen. Obviously, it's been a tremendous economic hit, and a lot of European countries are very dependent on tourism revenue, so I'm sure there's a lot of pressure on governments to reopen. On the other hand, I do think at some point that you have to try more and you have to reopen more of the economy. That's part of the whole bargain of lockdown easing in Europe, which is to say, no one's going to simply lift everything in one go and run a reckless risk of the second wave, but we're going to ease things up gradually, little by little, and see how it goes. And I think you can just objectively say that it has gone well, especially in France, which is going to forge ahead with the next phase of its lockdown easing. So I think it's fair enough. It has gone well so far.
Yeah, the UK, though, seems to be in a different category. I mean, we're lifting lockdown measures again, slowly, carefully, but a lot of criticism of the UK government that is actually happening too soon. How does the UK compare then to places that have been sort of quite successful so far, France, Italy, Germany, and so on?
I think the UK is a different case. I think the UK did a pretty bad initial sort of U-turn on its strategy. I think that its own lockdown in an attempt to be a kind of less strict, less draconian version of what was happening on the continent has been pretty confusing. I think that psychology and social commitment to lockdown and social distance is hugely important. And it's not clear to me that that's really. I mean, you can see the amount of disagreement happening in the UK, so that's pretty worrying. I would say in terms of case growth, it's still higher than a lot of other countries. So optimism should not extend to every country, every continent. This is a global pandemic that's hit at different stages. I think clearly the UK for now is in a different place.
And then the other thing that springs to mind, of course, if there is a second wave, and it's been raised before, the possibilities of bringing these draconian measures back in, people are going to look very sceptically at it, aren't they? They'll be worried about it.
Yeah, I am actually pretty doubtful that we will have a second lockdown, anything like the first. But I think we have to accept that the preparation of governments and the resources of governments has drastically improved. I think a lot of the lockdowns in Europe that we experienced were failures. There were failures of capacity, failures of resources and preparation. I would say, looking at things right now in terms of testing, medical resources, research, hospital capacity, things are better. They are objectively better.
Yeah, so perhaps we'll be in a better position going into winter. Thank you so much, Bloomberg opinion columnist Lionel Laurent, for joining us. And of course, you can catch up with all of Lionel's writing, OPIN Go, on the terminal or Bloomberg.com/opinion. Coming up next, we're going to talk to Fitch Ratings. They've cut their 2020 global growth forecast for the second time in a month.
With the Bloomberg Business of Sports report, I'm Michael Barr. Ice Cube's Big Three basketball league has sued Quinn Emanuel in New York State court, alleging the law firm acted as a spy for Qatar's business interests while representing the league in a dispute with a former executive. Big Three has been in a long-running dispute with Qatari investors, alleging that their interest in the 3-on-3 basketball league was a political charm offensive aimed at influencing U.S. policy toward Qatar. Brown University is revamping its sports program and cutting varsity sports teams as the school seeks to contend with earning just 2.8% of titles in the Ivy League over the last decade. The Providence, Rhode Island school says the changes don't relate to the pandemic, but date back to a review which found that the high number of varsity sports at Brown was a barrier to competitiveness. Varsity teams will be reduced from 38 to 29. And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports report. I'm Michael Barr.
Bloomberg and Eaton Vance are proud to present a Boston Pop salute to our heroes. This Independence Day, the orchestra's 4th of July tradition continues. The program will feature guest artists, highlights from past fireworks displays, new music paying tribute to the heroes of the current health crisis, and honoring the memories of those we have lost. Watch and listen Saturday, July 4th, starting at 8 Eastern, exclusively on Bloomberg Television and right here on Bloomberg Radio.
If you're having a business dispute, you know time is money. The longer your case proceeds, the more your case can cost. So speed up your resolution with the American Arbitration Association. Arbitration with the American Arbitration Association is faster. In fact, the median time frame for an American Arbitration Association B2B arbitration to be awarded is nearly 16 months faster than the U.S. courts. ADR.org. Resolve faster.
Jenny Liss. Emma, the UK's most awarded mattress in 2019. Try it out for 200 nights risk-free. Made in the UK. Go to emmamattress.co.uk to order now.
TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Buckle up, race fans.
NASCAR is back in the driver's seat.
And you can cut straight to the action here.
With the Performance Racing Network on TuneIn, you can hear PRN's live coverage of some of this year's top events.
As NASCAR's top drivers, Kevin Harvick,
Clint Boyer, and more get back on the track.
Search Performance Racing Network to listen and see upcoming races.
Looking to freshen up your listening on TuneIn? Head to the homepage to discover something new. There you'll see custom recommendations based on your listening habits, along with new episodes of shows you've enjoyed in the past. Uncover your next audio obsession on the homepage.
Get your MLB fix with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Fill your seventh inning stretch with the Ringer MLB Show.
I just can't get over it. It's like, oh, well, Jeter Downs. Didn't realize he was a top. Like, my dad is drinking the Kool-Aid on this. He's like, of course. Mookie was going to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? You don't know that.
Slide into second with the Starting Nine podcast.
Nolan Arenado slides right into the top spot for a favorite baseball player. Active in the league right now. It is a pleasure to be sitting next to you, sir.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is we've been waiting a long time for this. We actually, in terms of like active
Round the Bases with the Statcast podcast.
Ways of going about it. I picked third, so in some ways it made it easier for me. Mike, just to go over the first couple of picks. Mike took Barry Bonds, who I think was kind of the obvious guy to take number one. Not only
catch these and more MLB podcasts right here on TuneIn.
Broadcasting live to London on DAB digital radio, to New York, Bloomberg 1130, to Washington DC, Bloomberg 99.1, to Boston, Bloomberg 106.1, to San Francisco, Bloomberg 960, and around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
A very good morning from London. I'm Caroline Hebker. Warm welcome to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. So just breaking on the Bloomberg terminal this morning, UK May manufacturing figures. The PMI comes in at 40.7. The preliminary number was for 40.6. So still deeply in contraction territory, but yes, improving, as is Euro area manufacturing too. We had figures out for that this morning. Italy seems to be in the lead there in terms of the recovery, but still a lot of ground to make up, obviously. Having said that, May was a very strong month for European equities, and on the 1st of June this morning we're up by 0.5% on the Euro Stoxx 600. FTSE 100 gains 0.9%. The Xetra DAX is closed, holiday in Germany and other European markets for Whit Monday. One of the key leading stocks is Mediobanca in Italy, currently up by 8.6%, had gained as much as 14% 1%. Leonardo Del Vecchio, of course, the Italian eyewear billionaire. This is a long-running saga. He's stepping up his efforts to become a bigger player in Mediobanca, asking for approval to increase his stake to as much as 20%. So that has seen the Italian lender share price increase significantly this morning. In terms of the groups that are performing well in Europe, it is travel and leisure that is up by 1.5%. So that is the top gainer this morning. As for the US futures, though, much more complex story, obviously, in the US after extensive protests over the weekend across many major cities in the US. S&P 500 E-mini futures down by 0.4% right now, even though US stocks also had a very strong May. As for the bond markets, Italian BTPs trade at 1.45%, German yields negative 43 basis points, and US 10-year yields at 65 basis points. So those are the markets right now. I want to take you to one of our guests, though, this morning, and a bit more on the global financial picture. Global growth. Fitch Ratings has slashed its 2020 global GDP forecast again. The world economy is now expected to contract by 4.6% compared to 3.9%, which was predicted only last month. It reflects downward revisions for the Eurozone and the UK, and most significantly for emerging markets, excluding China. I'm pleased to say that we're joined this morning by Brian Coulton, who's Chief Economist at Fitch Ratings. Great to have you on the programme, Brian. Let's dive into this report. What is driving this revision lower, even worse global growth?
As you said, there's two aspects. There's Europe and the emerging markets ex-China picture. So in terms of Europe, I think there's two bits of that story, really. When we're looking at the Eurozone, I think what the incoming data is telling us is that the impact of the lockdowns in France, Italy and Spain in particular, on activity while the lockdown was in place was actually a bit more severe than we'd previously been assuming. It looks like activity was down something like 32%, 30 to 35% relative to normal levels. We'd previously been assuming about 25%. So, you know, one of the things that we're realising is that not all lockdowns are created equal. You know, some of them have been more stringent than others and had a bigger impact on the economy. So that's the story there in terms of the Eurozone picture. We've now got minus 9.5% for Italy and Spain. For the UK, I think it's more by the duration. It's not that the impact of the lockdown on the economy every day has been bigger than we thought. That's coming in about, the economy hit by about a fifth. But the lockdown is just lasting that bit longer. It doesn't seem that the new virus cases are coming down very quickly. So we're now into week 11. So that's the European story. On emerging markets, it's really all about the virus having deteriorated very, very sharply since our last forecast will finalise in the middle of April. We've got really big downward adjustment to India and Brazil.
Okay, Brian, the markets, though, I mean, particularly in Europe, seem to be looking through all of this bad news, looking for a rebound later this year into next year. But are we actually bottoming out, in your view?
I think we're getting more optimistic now at the margin that things are starting to improve. So, we've had that easing of lockdowns. It's been quite significant in Italy and France, for instance, also Germany as well, and across the US. It's hard to track it at the national level there, but clearly the lockdowns are easing, and providing that the virus doesn't resurge again is obviously a very important downside risk. But providing that doesn't happen, I think we're now more confident that May is looking better than April. So, you talked about those PMI numbers just now. We had a few last week. They're all looking a little bit better. Some of the confidence indicators improved. When we're looking at this daily activity data, the Google mobility data, that is showing in countries where the lockdown has eased, you are seeing visits back to retail recreation venues rise quite sharply. They're still down sort of 40-50% on normal, but it was 60-70% back in April. I think those indicators, plus the fact that we have seen this recovery in China, and the data's confirming that, makes us a little bit more comfortable that the bottoming out was probably in April. Things are starting to improve at the margin.
But just lastly, Brazil, India and Russia, you mentioned briefly. I mean, it feels like it's just at the beginning, really, of the major impact for those economies. That must be a concern.
I mean, the biggest adjustment
assessment here, our forecast has been India. Then we still had a positive growth number for the current financial year in our previous forecast. We're now down at -5. As I said, the lockdowns are all different, and India's had one of the most stringent lockdowns globally, and it's lasted a lot longer than we thought. And when we've been looking at the incoming data from India, it's been spectacularly weak. Some of the PMI is down at 5, for instance, in the service sector. Car sales, motor vehicles, really, really weak in macro data, and government that hasn't really been able to announce a big fiscal stimulus because of the constraints, and a fragile financial system. So you're not going to get the sort of big rebound, after the lockdown is eased that you might otherwise have. So yeah, India is the one that's really where our assessment has really changed a lot.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much, Brian Coulton, for joining us this morning. Chief Economist at Fitch Ratings, talking about their global growth forecast, which they have cut again because of the pandemic. Right, let's go over to Bloomberg's Leanne Gerrans now, who's got all the latest in global news headlines. Good morning.
Good morning, Caroline, and thank you. Protests continue to rage across the United States following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow reports from San Francisco.
Curfews are in place in San Francisco and San Jose as violence continues nationwide into the early hours of this morning. In Colorado, police fired tear gas at demonstrators while fires were started near to the White House in Washington. With many states hoping to reopen their economies this week, there's concerns the close proximity of protesters could spark a new outbreak of the deadly coronavirus that's already caused more than 100,000 deaths in the US. In San Francisco, Ed Ludlow, Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
The US is planning an expanded G7 meeting in the autumn. President Donald Trump told reporters he would also like to invite leaders from Russia, Australia, India and South Korea. He called the current setup outdated. The inclusion of Russia is likely to be the most controversial move. The country was suspended from what was then the G8 when it annexed Crimea back in 2014. Now, here in England, primary schools are starting to reintroduce more students as lockdown measures ease today. But a survey suggests half of parents might not send their children back. Children in reception years 1 and 6 are able to return, with many having now been out of school for 10 weeks. The Community Secretary, Robert Jenrick, says it's important pupils do go back.
All of the evidence suggests that it is children from the most deprived, the poorer households, who are losing out by not having that crucial face-to-face contact that you get in a school setting.
And in Brazil, the number of coronavirus cases continues to increase. The country's now surpassed Spain and France to become the state with the 5th largest death toll, but is second to the US in the number of virus cases. Meanwhile, the health ministry has said the curve of cases was still growing, suggesting there is no sign of the pandemic slowing in Brazil. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Gerrans. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne Gerrans, for that world news update. Well, with easing comes a bit more sports. Here's William Essler with the latest sports bulletin.
Professional sport can resume in the UK from today, with horse racing at Newcastle set to be the first event. On Saturday, the government announced domestic competitive events behind closed doors would be allowed as part of Phase 3 of their easing of coronavirus lockdown measures. The EFL are aiming to restart the championship season on the 20th of June and complete the playoffs by the end of July. They say it's important to stay in sync with the Premier League, which will resume on the 17th of next month. The EFL have also agreed to consider allowing the use of 5 substitutes in the remaining games. And 2 Formula 1 races are set to go ahead at Silverstone this summer. It's understood the government will give team personnel an exemption from the 14-day quarantine period. However, they must submit a detailed plan of their movements and whereabouts for approval. The F1 season is set to start in Austria on the 5th of July.
So that's the sports roundup for you. Coming up next on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, US equities have gained 36% since the March low. Can that resilience continue? Rick Lakai from State Street Global Advisors joins us next on Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Cole-Bear, filling in for Smokey because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Who's in your corner? At Commonwealth Financial Network, our advisors would say we are. Our supportive environment lets you be true to yourself, and our culture of accountability means we don't just ask for your feedback. We act on it, so we can deliver the solutions you need to enrich the lives of your clients and build the business you've always dreamed of. Ready to discover the difference? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com. Member FINRA SIPC, a registered investment advisor.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed, retrieve data fast. Scalability, grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity, easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
We're all in uncharted territory looking for ways to support our communities. At Dell Technologies, we're making sure small businesses have the right tech solutions. Dell Technologies advisors are here for you, helping small businesses stay connected and productive while working remotely with Windows 10 Pro and Microsoft Teams. We're standing by you every step of the way. Call us today on 0800 169 1745. That's 0800 169 1745.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Be part of the college sports conversation on TuneIn. Hear the latest storylines around SEC football with the Paul Feinbaum Show.
I distinctly remember when you were hired, and I must say most of us thought you were out of your mind, giving up. I wouldn't call it a cush job because you were traveling across the country.
Get your college hoops fix with college basketball talk on NBC Sports.
Headed by Shabazz Napier, that also included Amita Brima, who is in and around the NBA ranks right now, and DeAndre Daniels, who was the 37th pick in the 2014 NBA draft. So my question to you is,
Or listen to the daily news from around the wide world of college football with College Football Live.
I would go with Utah. I think Utah is the better team. And I know I'm talking to an Oklahoma guy, but listen, and it may be recency bias having watched Utah last week and doing that game, but I just think they're a more complete football.
Discover these and more college sports podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on QuickTake by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good morning from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York City. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern with this Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Overnight, we did see Asian equities post gains. The CSI 300 was up handsomely, as well as the Hang Seng, both nearly up 3%. This comes as many were happy with what President Donald Trump said on Friday in terms of not so much draconian measures towards China, but in the last hour or so, China did say they were halting some farm imports, and that is going to be negative for the markets. We do see U.S. futures in the red, and we do have the Stock 600 still in the green, but off session highs. We are up some 0.5%, and the DAX this morning is a lower 1.6% in Germany. On top of that as well, could be adding to some of this tension, especially in U.S. futures. We had unrest over the weekend with protests, many of them turning violent across the United States from coast to coast. In the currency market this morning, euro dollar 1.11, a bit higher. We do have European economies opening up and welcoming tourists. The Bloomberg dollar index is lower this morning, under a bit of pressure, and cable 1.24. In the oil market, Brent is actually higher at the moment, $37.91, but WTI is down 0.3%. We'll say $35 and change. All of this is OPEC debates whether or not they should move up their meeting. It's supposed to be next week, but it might end up being Thursday, and they're looking at potentially not tapering those production cuts just yet, so deeper for a little bit longer. That's a Bloomberg Radio Business Flash. Now here's Leanne Garens with more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Leanne.
Good morning, Anne-Marie, and thank you. Mass testing in the city of Wuhan may have eradicated the coronavirus. Authorities in the Chinese city say they found no asymptomatic cases for the first time in nearly 2 months. Wuhan is testing its entire population of 11 million for the virus. Infected people who show no signs of being sick can still infect others. Now, the UK government is coming under pressure from its own scientists to show caution in easing the lockdown. More than 20 experts wrote a letter to the Observer newspaper saying public faith has been badly damaged by the Cummings saga, but Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has defended the decision to loosen restrictions, saying scientists do not always agree. And finally, 2 American astronauts have boarded the International Space Station from a SpaceX capsule. It marks the first time humans have traveled to orbit on a commercial space aircraft. It forges a new era for NASA and is a big win for billionaire Elon Musk. It's also the first time American astronauts have flown from U.S. soil since the shuttle program ended in 2011. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on QuickTake by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Leanne Garens. This is Bloomberg Caroline.
Thank you so much, Leanne, with the world news update. Now, coming up next, our colleagues in the United States are getting ready for Bloomberg Daybreak. Let's check in with Nathan Hager. After such a difficult weekend in the US, what's ahead for you on the program, Nathan?
Really hoping, Caroline, that things get better in this country. We are coming back from a weekend of upheaval in cities across the United States. Protests over the killing of an African-American man in police custody, only adding to concerns over the coronavirus that had been dominating the discussion for all these weeks about, what the shape of the economic recovery is going to be like. And now between all that and renewed tensions with China, as we get that report that China's cutting some soy imports, it might not feel like exaggeration to say this country is on the brink of chaos. We're going to get insights on it all from Dennis Gartman this morning. The former publisher of the Gartman Letter will join us, along with Greg Vallier of AGF Investments and Jim Paulson, Chief Investment Officer at Luthold Wheaton. They'll all be with me, and Karen Moscow this morning as we get the week started here on Bloomberg Daybreak. Definitely hoping it's a better one, Caroline.
Absolutely. And obviously, the world really watching the US. There were protests to match what was happening in the US, albeit much smaller, match in terms of sympathy. Trafalgar Square in London, Belfast, Manchester in Germany, across Europe. So a lot of eyes on what is going on in America and what is happening there. Thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us this morning. Bloomberg Daybreak is up next. If you're listening, though, on London DAB Digital Radio, you'll hear Bloomberg Surveillance. But it really is the story that has dominated over the weekend. What is the impact, though, in terms of investors? Because we've had a couple of months of gains in terms of global equities. That's been stoked by this optimism about the reopening of major economies, but there are concerns. Nathan mentioned about a second wave of the coronavirus, violence erupting in US cities, plenty of potential headwinds. Joining us down the line this morning is Rick Lakai, State Street Global Advisors Global CIO. Rick, as we watch with horror really what happens in the US, how do investors think about this? Does this matter in terms of where you put your money? Obviously it matters, on a human level.
I think, yes, it obviously matters enormously on a human level, and it's a horrific thing to see the death of that man and also the violence. But from a risk-taking perspective, we've seen a resurgence in risk appetite and markets reaching high levels. I think they may have got a little bit ahead of themselves, but there's no doubt the underlying real economic story is getting better. And I think that, the issue the last week or so could certainly be a setback. But I think the main issue the investors are going to focus on is, will there be a resurgence of cases? Will there be a need for a little bit more slowing down of the easing? And I think that testing may show that in coming weeks. But at the moment, markets are really thinking that the rebound is here and it's going to have some momentum.
Okay, this, as we got the China PMI data out this morning, so now the Caixin private figure and the government figure does point to something of a rebound, but it's not that strong, is it? How important is that for you as a leading indicator?
Well, I think the early stages of the rebound often can be very strong. They can be patchy. We saw housing data in the US that was very strong for new home sales. A little bit less so for existing home sales. So you've got a lot of noise in there. I do think that the first stage of this recovery over May, June, July will be quite strong in many parts of the world. But it may tail off a little bit, and you've seen precautionary saving, which may put a limit on the rebound later this year. Nevertheless, it's a rebound that we should acknowledge.
What about the risks in Europe? A lot of market focus will be on Thursday, the ECB decision. How much does the ECB need to add to its stimulus package in order to satisfy markets in terms of its bond buying? Is there a risk, as we've seen Italian bond yields, differentials with German bond yields significantly come in over the last month?
Well, yes, the focus will be on the ECB, but I think in a way, the story has moved ahead in terms of what might be coming from the European Union from a fiscal perspective, either loans or grants and other things, and how that might begin to impact the story. There is a limit to what the ECB can do. I think they've been extremely supportive, and I don't expect them to do more, but maybe not a quantum leap in terms of or maybe not an enormous leap in terms of the volume. And I think there's definitely a sense that central banks have done what they can. They've reacted quite quickly. They've provided liquidity. But it's the real economy that needs to be stimulated by fiscal means as well. And I think the red lines are slowly being, if not erased, then made less sharp in Europe. And I think you've seen that in Italian government bond yields in the last couple of weeks.
Do you think that anything in terms of the financial markets is going to radically change? I understand that we are, under this severe strain, the pandemic, the lockdowns, the violence in the US. But I remember during the global financial meltdown a decade ago, there were a lot of similar cries that, the current status quo cannot continue, calls for change. But the question marks about whether anything radically did alter. What is your perspective now? I think it's quite a historic moment, isn't it?
I think what I fear is that we'll have a continuing edging away from multilateral policy development to national interests. And national interests could work well, but it's much more likely that they'll be potentially risky, and conflict between nations on trade will be unhelpful to a long-lasting recovery. So I think that the great fear is that in this rush to renationalize policy and turn away from multinational policies, we will have a weaker recovery than we really could. And I think better coordination will lead to better outcomes. But I worry that there are not enough voices speaking up for that in policy circles.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Rick, for joining us this morning. Rick Lakai, State Street Global Advisors, Global CIO, joining us this morning on Bloomberg Radio and on television this morning. So I thank you for the double hit for Bloomberg this morning, taking us through the markets, of course. Okay, we're coming to the end of this hour. We're going to hand over to Bloomberg Daybreak out of the US in a moment. And so I want to leave you with the markets in Europe, up 0.6%. We had a bigger jump at the start of European trading at the beginning of June, but we come back in still positive though. The FTSE 100 gains more than 1%. The euro trades at 1.11 this morning, stronger 0.3%. A weaker dollar, and US futures, if you're starting to look to the US Open, down 0.2% on the S&P 500. This is Bloomberg.
If you have to drive, then it's more important than ever to watch your speed. As London starts to reopen, there are going to be more people on our streets. There'll be more people cycling, more people walking to work or to the shops. If you must drive, avoid the morning and evening peaks when the roads will be busier. We want the streets to be safe for everyone, all the time. So watch your speed. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be one team hold up the trophy.
10, race to the 5, touchdown! Search Classic Game Replays to listen for free.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
Mr. Darren Waller, good to have you.
Yes, sir, it's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Monday, June 1st, 2020. Coming up this hour.
Protests hammer cities across the country following the death of George Floyd.
Violent clashes include vandalism, torch police cars, and thousands of arrests.
As tensions rise, President Trump meets with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials.
A 4th day of protests against police brutality kept New York City on edge. Plus, New Jersey will reopen sectors of the state from the coronavirus lockdown. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. NBA players react to the protests and a response from the baseball players as they try to make a labor deal with owners.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Witham. For 45 years, Witham has been committed to helping businesses be in a position of strength. For guidance on business interruption, continuity issues, and remote workplace solutions, visit Witham.com.
U.S. futures slightly lower to start the week. It is 5:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 10 points. Dow futures down 68. NASDAQ futures down 48. The DAX in Germany is little change. The CAC in Paris is up 0.9%, and so is the FTSE 100. Nikkei 225 in Japan gained 0.8%. The Hang Seng in Hong Kong up 3 1/3%. 10-year Treasury down 2/30 seconds, yield 0.66%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.6% or 19 cents at $35.30 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.2% or $3.50 at $17.48.20 an ounce. The euro 1.1140 against the dollar. The yen 107.41. Nathan.
Karen, we are coming off the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. That's the sound of police in Minneapolis firing flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a 4th day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the city, interspersed with some violent clashes that included vandalism, torched police cars, and dozens of arrests. It was a similar scene in Boston. Peaceful rallies turned violent as protesters hit police with bottles, damaged vehicles, and looted stores throughout downtown Crossing and the Back Bay. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and Los Angeles, to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer.
At the same time in Washington.
No peace! No peace! No peace! No peace!
Chance of no justice, no peace heard as part of demonstrations outside the White House. For the very latest, we bring in Amy Morris from our Bloomberg 99.1 Washington newsroom.
Angry protesters took over the streets of Washington, D.C. last night, some of them setting fires, vandalizing buildings and cars, and looting just blocks from the White House. Historic St. John's Church outside the White House was vandalized and set on fire. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser activated the National Guard. The Justice Department has now deployed the U.S. Marshals Service and agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration to supplement those National Guard troops outside the White House. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Amy, thank you. Unrest across the country took center stage on the Sunday talk shows.
Let's come together. Let's be prayerful, especially on a Sunday morning, about how we can put our differences aside, because this is the greatest country in the world, and we want to live up to the legacy of America.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on ABC's This Week, where we also heard from Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar.
We are living in a country that has a two-tiered justice system, and people are tired of people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Omar says the latest examples of police brutality against African Americans are shocking but typical.
We are living in a country that has truly, for a long time, brutalized African Americans.
President Trump's head of national security says the White House stands in solidarity with George Floyd. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien blames violent protests on Antifa, a loosely organized movement that is a frequent target of conservative critics.
It's the violent Antifa, radical militants that are coming out under cover of night, traveling across state lines, using military-style tactics to burn down our cities. And they're especially targeting the most vulnerable parts of our cities.
Now, there were no public remarks from President Trump over the weekend, though he was active on Twitter, saying he'll label Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. He threatened protesters with tweets about vicious dogs and ominous weapons and blamed liberal governors and mayors for the unrest. The president plans today to meet with Attorney General William Barr before convening a teleconference with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials. There are currently no public remarks on the president's schedule.
The president's comments on Twitter are not helping the situation, according to D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
I think that the president has a responsibility to help calm the nation, and he can start by not sending divisive tweets that are meant to hearken to the segregationist past of our country.
Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Mayor Bowser singled out the president's tweet about vicious dogs as a reference to segregationists that let dogs out on women and children in the South. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms also took issue with the president's comments. She spoke on Face the Nation from CBS.
What I'd like to hear from the president is leadership, and I would like to hear
a genuine care and concern for our communities and where we are with race relations in America.
This week, Meet the Press and Face the Nation can all be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio.
Now, despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight. Now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. President Trump last week moved to rescind the city's special trading status. China says the measure would gravely interfere with China's internal affairs. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks. Straight ahead, the latest world and national news, and this is Bloomberg.
Okay, Karen, thank you. It is 5:07 on Wall Street. Let's bring in Michael Barr for more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Thousands of people marched peacefully, for the most part, in New York City Sunday over the death of George Floyd. Many protesters and officers tried to keep the peace after days of unrest that left police cars burned and hundreds of people under arrest. Last night, some stores were looted. The NYPD believes violence has been deliberately stirred up by outside groups trying to hijack the protests. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo called for protesters to use common sense.
That violence never works. How many protests have we had? How many nights have we gone through like last night?
Over 30 NYPD officers were hurt over the weekend. Cuomo says the National Guard is on standby. Yesterday, thousands of people marched through multiple neighborhoods, chanting, kneeling in the street, and falling silent for a minute in front of the police station in Times Square to remember the people killed by police. Mayor Bill de Blasio says he has no plans to impose a curfew.
When you add up how many things were happening in how many places all over this city, it says something about New York City. It says something about the people of New York City. It says something about the NYPD, that thank God there was no loss of life. There were no major injuries.
De Blasio also reacted to a video of two police cruisers plowing into protesters in Brooklyn, saying, "I did not like what I saw one bit. I don't want to ever see that again." Among the hundreds of protesters arrested over the weekend was Mayor de Blasio's daughter. Chiara de Blasio was arrested for unlawful assembly with a group of protesters at 12th Street near Broadway. She was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Cuomo.
Net change in hospitalizations down again, intubations down again, number of new deaths still dropping.
There were 56 new deaths reported in New York State from the coronavirus. In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next weekend, while child care centers can open on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. It's 5:09 on Wall Street. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Good morning, John Stashower.
And good morning, Nathan. It's the start of a big week. If baseball is to come to an agreement on how much players should make in a shortened season without fans, last week was the owner's proposal, loudly panned by players who are now making their pitch back. The details do not sound like something that will lead to a deal. They want full pay for the games being played. They admit pay for those making $10 million a year or more can be deferred, but only if the postseason can't be played, and the payback should come with interest. They say if a player chooses not to play due to concerns about the virus, they should still be paid. They want more games, expanded playoffs in 2021. They pitch ideas to make baseball more popular, like an off-season all-star game and players mic'd up during games, but if there are no games in 2020 because of money, baseball figures to become significantly less popular in the years ahead. Some athletes were part of the weekend-long protest. The Celtics' Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours to his native Georgia to protest in Atlanta. Michael Jordan, for so long criticized for not speaking out about non-basketball issues, released a statement in the wake of the death of George Floyd. He said he's pained, saddened, and angry. Thabo Sefolosha of the Houston Rockets said George Floyd could have been him. Sefolosha in 2015 was wrongly attacked by New York police outside a Manhattan nightclub. They broke his leg. He sued. settled for $4 million, which he largely donated to charity. NASCAR, Bristol, Tennessee, the leaders, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, crashed with a lap to go, and the race was won by Brad Keselowski. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan.
And John, let's talk for a second about what could have been in this week in the sports world. The NBA and NHL playoffs were scheduled to happen this week, along with the final leg of racing's Triple Crown. That was supposed to have happened on Saturday. Instead, the Belmont Stakes will be the Triple Crown's first race this year. It'll take place in about 3 weeks, June 20th, with no fans. And this would have been the second week of the French Open, with fourth-round matches, quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals. S&P futures are down 6 points right now. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
Debbie Hart is...
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment. Feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Emma, the UK's most awarded mattress in 2019. Try it out for 200 nights risk-free. Made in the UK. Go to emmamattress.co.uk to order now.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed. Retrieve data fast. Scalability. Grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity. Easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable. with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Here's Emily Chang on Bloomberg Technology.
With so many countries under lockdown around the world, that means there has been a growing backlog of legal cases. And with courts slowly starting to reopen up, this is a challenge. Joining us to talk about the bottleneck is Sunita Bali, partner at Perkins Coie law firm. We're seeing massive court backlogs. Talk to us about what this actually means.
You know, courts are trying to balance the safety concerns for the public and court employees with the need to continue judicial operations. And one of the side effects has certainly been delays. There's been a variety of approaches taken by courts, state and federal courts across the country, as things continue to change rapidly and courts try to find ways to adapt to the constant changes. As you mentioned, some courts are already preparing to reopen. They're putting protective measures in place, such as requiring face coverings or taking temperatures prior to entering the courthouse. And they plan to have some proceedings go forward in business cases in person. Whereas other courts have transitioned to conducting hearings by telephone or video conference to keep things moving.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. stock index futures are lower this morning, while European shares hold on to modest gains after Chinese officials told agriculture companies to pause imports on some farm goods. There's no trading in Germany or Switzerland today, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 7 points this morning. Dow futures down 35. NASDAQ futures down 40. The DAX in Germany, well, no trading there today, as we said, and the FTSE 100 is up 1%. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds. Yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down about 0.8% or 28 cents at $35.22 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.1% on $1.80 at $17.49.80 an ounce. The euro 1.1133 against the dollar. British pound 1.2414 and the yen 107.48. Today we are watching for reports on construction spending and manufacturing out at 10 o'clock Wall Street time. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Thank you very much, Karen. Tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Peaceful demonstrations yesterday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. A truck driver drove into demonstrators in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died after a white police officer put his knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes. Outside the White House, police fired tear gas and stun grenades into a crowd who lit fires in a street. Thieves in more than 20 California cities smashed into businesses and ran off with cell phones and TVs. Atlanta's mayor says 2 police officers have been fired and 3 others placed on desk duty over excessive use of force during a weekend protest incident. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It is 5:19 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Dennis Gartman is with us this morning, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter. At a pivotal moment, it seems, in this country, Dennis, there had been so much optimism in the markets surrounding the prospects for reopening the economy during the coronavirus pandemic. Now, with cities across the country in many ways literally on fire, what does this mean for the image of the United States as a place to invest?
It can't be good, Nathan. It just simply cannot be good. As I've always said in interviews and speeches and in writing, all economics boils down to the propensity of somebody to take action. And at the margin, when the last 2% of the sellers become buyers, or when the last 2% of the buyers become sellers, price changes. At the margin, one has to think that the propensity for money to move to the United States has been greatly reduced. I mean, if I were a German, if I were a Brit, if I were a Japanese investor, my propensity to move money to the United States would be almost nil. My propensity to take money out of the United States would be greatly enhanced. And I was surprised, I must admit, I was stunned last night, given the political circumstances that prevailed over the weekend, given the rioting, the eruption, the near revolutionary activities that have taken place across the country. When I was asked yesterday afternoon what I thought the Dow would open, I thought the futures would open 300, 400 lower. The fact that they only opened 250 lower was surprising to me. The fact that they actually got higher during the middle of the evening last night was even more surprising to me. I'm stunned by this. Is revolution and rioting supportive of stock prices? For some reason it seems to be. It makes no sense, but that's what's happening.
And the interesting aspect of that as well is that now we've started to see futures in the United States turn lower on the news from our Bloomberg colleagues this morning that China is considering pausing some U.S. farm imports, particularly soy. It's interesting to see what the market appears to be focused on. It almost seems like it's all about China at this point.
Well, in the last hour and a half or 2 hours, it has become of China. What is interesting to me is that the bean futures overnight, corn futures overnight, have not gone demonstrably lower. One would have thought, given that news out of China, that soybeans would have fallen 20 or 30 cents per bushel, that corn would be down a nickel or a dime, that wheat would be down 15 or 20 cents, and yet they're very, essentially unchanged. The markets seem to me to be as illogical and as strange as I have ever seen them in my 45 years of being involved.
When you talk about movement at the margins, what do you think would take investors just beyond the margins and changing their way of thinking? What do you think is driving market sentiment at this point?
Well, I think it's the Federal Reserve policies and the monetary authorities around the world are all being expansionary, and they should be, given the circumstances that prevail, given the coronavirus, given the rebellions, given the rioting in the United States, given the decline in employment, the rise in unemployment, whether it's here in the United States or in Europe, given the fact that everybody's optimistic this morning because the PMIs in Europe were a little bit better than expected, but they're still down below 50. The monetary authorities have to be expansionary, and the old rule is don't fade the Fed. I've tried to fade the Fed. It makes sense for me to fade the Fed, but fading the Fed has been a losing proposition. So it is all monetary authority expansionary policy that is driving stock prices higher.
Do you see monetary policy expanding even further given the unrest we're seeing in the country right now? Does that move the Fed?
It has to. It cannot be. They cannot move off center. They have to continue to be expansionary. They have no choice at this point. So they can talk about allowing the Fed to slow down the purchases of bonds, but they have no choice. They have to be continuously expansionary. Us, the ECB, the Bank of China, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, they have no choice.
So what does that mean for Treasury yields? I mean, is there a possibility that if the Fed continues with the expansionary policy that it has been on, that we could see negative yields on Treasuries?
It is possible. At the short end of the curve, you could get down to You could take it to negative. I think that the Fed doesn't want to do that. They've made their statements several times, and I think Mr. Powell has been openly non-supportive of the possibility of moving to negative rates. But short rates can go to near zero. At the long end of the curve, however, I could see long rates moving somewhat higher, and the yield curve becoming far more positively sloped, which would help the banking community. So I think inflationary pressures, and they will be extant given the expansionary monetary policies eventually. All inflation is a monetary phenomenon. I still am a monetarist at heart. So the long end of the curve could see rates go higher. The short end of the curve could see rates go lower, and a much more positive sloped yield curve, which would be helpful to the banking system.
We're speaking with Dennis Gartman, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter, with us this morning on Bloomberg Daybreak. You have been watching the markets for decades. I wonder how you compare the moment we're in now with unrest in the country, concerns about the coronavirus continuing even as the economy reopens, to past crises we've gone through, the Occupy Wall Street movement, the 2008 crisis, 1968. How do you use those moments to compare how we could get through what we're experiencing now?
Well, we will get through this eventually. Let us hope that we shall get through this. I don't want to think otherwise. The closest to the approximation is what happened in 1968 to 1970 with the increased activity in the war in Vietnam. racial strife in Cleveland, the Watts conflagration. This is the closest thing I can imagine is what happened back then. And it took us several years to get through it. We will get through this, but those of us who make our living trading, we live from Tuesday to Tuesday. Sometimes you live from Tuesday morning to Tuesday afternoon in many instances. But the closest thing is the late 1960s and early 1970s. And let us, we got through that. We'll get through this. Let's hope.
A lot of the difference between those moments and the current one is the leadership in this country. The president over the weekend didn't make any public comments, but did do a lot of tweeting, talking about Antifa, the possibility of labeling it as a terrorist organization, and taking a strong stance against the protesters, even outside the White House. How does the difference in presidential leadership affect how things could turn out here?
Well, let's first of all understand that I'm somewhat to the right of Genghis Khan politically and economically, and I did in fact vote. And I did in fact vote for Mr. Trump, but he has not handled this as well as I think previous presidents might have handled this. One would have hoped. Mr. Reagan would have handled it demonstrably differently. He would have gone on national television and talked to the American people. The president probably should have done that rather than use tweets. And tweets are too short in nature, too cursive, too short. And I would have liked to have seen the president come on TV last night and say, "Look, we understand what happened in Minneapolis, but what is happening across the country is illogical and ill-advised, and we will not stand for it." His comments last week on when the rioting starts, the shooting begins, was I thought just ill-advised on his part. Let us hope that cooler heads do prevail. We've had black leaders come out and say this is not what we want to do. This is not in the best interest of the black community. Let us hope that better heads prevail. They probably shall, but it shall take another week or two before they do.
And if cooler heads do prevail,
and let us hope
as we head into the weeks and months ahead, does any of this change your prospects for what the shape of the economic recovery could look like as we head into the second half?
It can't give rise to a V shape. It probably won't give rise to a U shape. I've said before it'll give rise to a weak W where each leg is demonstrably lesser than the previous one. This is going to take a long period of time. Let us hope that Mr. Powell continues to be expansionary. They have to be. Let us hope that the Congress becomes even more amenable to fiscal irresponsibility, for lack of a better term, and sponsors greater infrastructure spending requirements. As a right winger, I would normally be antithetical to that, but we have no choice at this point. That's right now, I think share prices are extremely high. I think stock prices probably could go lower, but I would have thought that the Dow would have opened 500 lower and not traded higher, and I was wrong about that overnight.
Well, I wonder at what point does political risk become a factor that markets begin to consider? I mean, we're less than 6 months away from an election here. Does that come on the table at some point? I mean, given all the factors that markets have to look at right now.
Sure it does. So, and the barometer for that will be the dollar versus the euro. The dollar versus the euro the dollar had been extraordinarily strong, and I thought it was going to continue. But when the European Union last week, when the French and the Germans reached an accord on spending, when the frugal four agreed to it, that was a change in monetary policy, a change in political policy over in Europe. So keep an eye on what the euro is doing. Anything above 112, and we could quickly get to 117. The dollar will be the barometer, and right now I think we see a weakening U.S. dollar.
Yeah, we're seeing that.
We're probably going to keep an eye on gold too, because if gold gets to 1750 in the nearby and gets to 1775. All bets are off on the downside on stock prices.
Yeah, and of course, on the session this morning, we're seeing weakness on both fronts between the dollar and gold. Gold trading slightly lower this morning, just shy of the 1750 level at 1748.90. Dennis Gartman, always good getting your insights. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. That is Dennis Gartman, economist and former publisher of the Gartman Letter, with us on Bloomberg Daybreak. Karen, back to you.
All right, Nathan, thank you. It is 5:30 on Wall Street. We're just about 4 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date on the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower after the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. Police in Minneapolis fired flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a fourth day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the country interspersed with violent clashes. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and L.A., to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. Chicago's plan to lift coronavirus restrictions this week may be delayed due to the protests. Demonstrations are adding to what's already a tense environment in many parts of the country. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
We have communities all around the state that are desperately trying to recover from the damage that this virus has done. And I'm imploring people to not force a difficult second rebuilding on our small businesses in the course of expressing your very justified pain.
Chicago is set to start reopening Wednesday. Now Mayor Lori Lightfoot is consulting with officials to reconsider the plan.
Now, despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight, but now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. President Trump last week moved to rescind the city's special trading status. China says the measure would gravely interfere with China's internal affairs. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks. Now let's get you up to date on how stocks are faring. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 6.5 points. Dow futures down 34. NASDAQ futures down 41. There's no trading in Germany today, and the FTSE 100 is up 1%. 10-year Treasury down 2/32, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.7% or 24 cents at $35.25 a barrel. COMEX gold is down about 0.2% or $3.20 at $17.4850 an ounce. The euro is at 1.1123 against the dollar. British pound 1.2403, and the yen is at 107.55. And straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It is 5:33 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's happening around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Protests over the death of George Floyd in police custody stretched into a fourth day in New York City on Sunday after there was citywide vandalism. Police cars were set ablaze and hundreds were arrested during several days of protests. In Soho, there were several stores looted. Large crowds angry over the George Floyd death gathered peacefully for hours around New York City in the day. However, by the night, some clashes with police were reported, along with small street fires and looting. Mayor Bill de Blasio believes violence in New York City over the weekend was caused by outsiders hijacking peaceful protests over the police custody death of George Floyd. De Blasio said among the thousands of demonstrators who marched through the streets, there were those he called agitators.
The X factor here of a different kind of small set of, I would call them not just protesters, but people who came to do violence in a systematic, organized fashion. That is a different reality we need to grapple with.
Police Commissioner Dermot O'Shea said his officers encountered some of the worst incidents on 125th Street in Harlem over the weekend and blame agitators who took over.
What we quickly identified, though, was a group within that used the 125th Street peaceful demonstration. I would liken it to hijacking a peaceful demonstration.
Close to 36 officers sustained minor injuries. More than 300 protesters were arrested, including the 25-year-old daughter of Mayor de Blasio. Chiara de Blasio was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Number of lives lost down to 56, which is, in this absurd reality we live in, actually very, very good news.
In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next weekend, while child care centers can reopen on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. 5:35 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashauer.
All right, Nathan. Last week we heard from the baseball owners. They're planning for a shortened 2020 season without fans. Players reacted quite negatively. Union now set to make its pitch. Significantly more games. MLB called for 82. The Union wants 114. More games, more pay for them, but baseball feels more games, the more money they'll lose. The only financial concession made by the players, an offer to defer some payments, but only if the postseason can't be played because of a second wave of the virus. It sounds as if the two sides are very far apart. Meanwhile, latest team to announce layoffs and furloughs, the Arizona Diamondbacks, 25% of their staff. We've already seen the financially strapped Oakland A's say they can't afford to pay minor leaguers $400 a week. Pittsburgh Pirates stopped contributing to employees' 401k plans. Even the big market Red Sox have cut employee salaries. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of the J.R. Smith brain freeze. Playing for Cleveland in the NBA Finals at Golden State, the former Knick grabbed a rebound with the score tied. Instead of shooting to try and win the game, he dribbled away thinking the Cavs were ahead. Smith, who didn't play this season, back in the news. The window of his truck was smashed during the protests in L.A., and Smith is seen in a TMZ video beating up the white man who he says did it. Smith was seen punching, kicking, and later boasting about it. Another NASCAR race. This one, Bristol, Tennessee. Same winner as the previous race in Charlotte. Brad Keselowski, he won when Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, both ahead of him, crashed with a lap to go. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
All right, John, thank you. It is 5:37 on Wall Street. It's time for the Tri-State Business Report. Here's Bloomberg's Ed Corey.
New York City's finance industry won't recover from the devastation wrought by COVID-19 until 2026. That's according to an analysis by software firm ThinkIQ that ranks U.S. employment markets. The New York City region lost about 8% of its finance jobs this year, down from a peak of more than 800,000 last August. Atlantic City's casinos could reopen by the July 4th weekend after months of closures to curb the advance of the coronavirus. That's according to Governor Phil Murphy. New Jersey's in the first stage of a multi-stage reopening plan that aims to return the state to some form of normalcy amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the road to economic recovery from the coronavirus can't be built fast enough for Connecticut's travel industry. Data from the Connecticut Department of Labor shows a loss of more than 72,000 tourism-related jobs in a month's time, the biggest decline among any of the sectors the state agency tracks. That's your Bloomberg Tri-State Business Report. I'm Ed Corey.
Thank you, Ed. It's 5:38 on Wall Street. Bloomberg Radio is on the air from San Francisco to New York, London to Hong Kong. Let's check in with our global news team for some of the top stories heard on our 300 affiliate radio stations around the world.
I'm Jeff Bellinger, and on WTVN in Columbus, I'm reporting on the shutdown of some Amazon delivery stations because of violent protests in some cities.
I'm Roger Hearing. On Bloomberg DAB Digital Radio in London, we're reporting on criticism from scientists on the government's easing of the lockdown.
I'm Gina Cervetti, and for WBBM in Chicago, I'm talking about China halting some U.S. farm imports, threatening the trade deal.
I'm Ed Corey on WWJ in Detroit. I'm reporting Lear is implementing costly safety measures at a plant in Mexico.
Those are some of the stories our 2,700 Bloomberg journalists and analysts are working on this morning around the world. It is 5:39 on Wall Street, and the latest edition of Bloomberg Business Week is online now with the cover story on President Trump's political gamble to reopen the economy. Terminal customers can receive a complimentary subscription at MAG Go and listen to Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio, or watch it on YouTube. Weekdays from 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Get global business, finance, and tech news on your TV, computer, or mobile device. Just visit youtube.com and search Bloomberg Global News. And now some other stories we're following this morning. Goldman Sachs says the U.S. labor market is showing the earliest signs of recovery. In a report to clients, economist Jan Hatzius wrote a drop in continued jobless claims, especially in states that reopened earlier than others, suggests rehiring by businesses may be starting to turn the tide. Senior Facebook employees are criticizing Mark Zuckerberg. They went on Twitter to express their unhappiness that their CEO is not taking action on incendiary comments President Trump posted on Facebook. Last week, the president posted a message saying, quote, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Zuckerberg says he didn't put warnings on that post because People need to know if the government's planning military action. And shifting gears now, the semiconductor industry will reportedly lobby the U.S. government for billions in federal funding. According to the Wall Street Journal, chip makers want the money for factory building and research. The goal is to keep the U.S. in front of China and other countries that heavily subsidize their own chip industries. S&P futures are down 7 points right now. Dow futures lower by 38. NASDAQ futures down 46. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC. This is your Bloomberg.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
If you can build that flat pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game. From rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Get your daily dose of NFL shop talk with these great podcasts on TuneIn. Start your morning off right with Around the NFL.
Injured, depleted roster into the playoffs, and I didn't think they belonged in the playoffs.
I think overall, though, it was a great divisional round weekend because you got the first one.
Run into the end zone with the Move the Sticks podcast.
We had a fun little Zoom cocktail hour last night.
Oh, yeah.
What a star-studded affair. Greg, you were there for the earlier part, but it really popped off a little later on. We had Zach Goldman.
And dive deep into the sidelines with the Peter King podcast.
On the occasion of his 50th birthday, come down and record a little bit of retrospective on the life and times of Brett Lorenzo Favre.
That sounds like a bestseller.
It sounds like a precursor to a funeral. That's what it is.
I wasn't thinking that.
Explore these and more hard-hitting NFL podcasts right here on TuneIn.
And at TikTok on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
Special reports, protests and violence. Tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Some 4,400 arrested nationwide. Peaceful demonstrations Sunday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Los Angeles to New York City, where we find our Steve Kastenbaum.
Throughout the day Sunday, tens of thousands of people took part in peaceful, nonviolent protests across New York. At times, some even made peace with police officers. But as day turned to night and crowds thinned, some who remained on the streets clashed with police. There were more scenes of bottles being thrown, some cops appearing to use excessive force.
West cities and smaller towns throughout the state of New York. I'm John Trout.
They don't just talk to the most important people.
Is it as ominous this time around?
They talk with the most interesting people.
Are they taking this seriously?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Pause imports of some farm goods. No trading in Germany or Switzerland today. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Right now, S&P futures are down about 8 points. Dow futures down 48. NASDAQ futures down 50. The DAX in Germany, again, no trading there. And the FTSE 100 is up 0.9%. 10-year Treasury down 230 seconds, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9% or 31 cents at $35.18 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.2% or $2.70 at $17.49.20 an ounce. The euro 1.1114 against the dollar. British pound 1.2389 and the yen 107.61. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen protests have swept the United States in the last 6 days in the wake of George Floyd's death at the hands of police in Minnesota. Derek Chauvin, the officer arrested and charged for his part in the death of Floyd, was moved from the city jail in Minneapolis to another location. The gunfire that killed a black woman in Kentucky and wounded one of the plainclothes police detectives who crashed through her front door has fueled a debate over so-called no-knock warrants. More than 2 months after police fatally shot Breonna Taylor, the Louisville mayor has announced an indefinite suspension on the warrants that allow officers to enter a home without announcing their presence. The president says that he is designating Antifa as a domestic terrorism organization after another night of violent protests. Civil rights group protested President Trump's actions. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
All right, Michael, thank you. It is 5:49 on Wall Street and live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak. Let's talk a little bit more about the president's response to the upheaval in this country, the potential political fallout here. Greg Vallier joins us now, Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Good as always to talk with you, Greg. And of course, typically after the kind of weekend we've suffered through in this country, a president would perhaps make an address in the Oval Office or somewhere in the White House to try to calm the nation. What we've seen from President Trump, of course, has been a lot of tweets. What do you make of how the president has responded at this moment?
Well, it leaves a lot to be desired. You have to say that, whether you're on the left or right. And I think that he has to say something definitive today.
Well, what's interesting, though, is we heard from a number of mayors, Democratic mayors, including the leader of Atlanta and Washington, D.C., indicating that it might be better for the president not to say anything, given his response in the past to incidents like the Charlottesville unrest. What to make of those comments? Would it be better if the president, lived up to the old adage that if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all?
Yeah, he's hearing mixed messages from his advisors, according to reports this morning. Some feel he has to say something. Others realize he's not real good behind a teleprompter. And he may not have much to say. That actually he could provoke things, as he did over the weekend when he said that he would sick dogs on protesters.
And he has taken this sort of hard line response, as he often has in the past, to the protest. How does that potentially impact things politically for him to, in a lot of ways, feed to his base with his reaction to this?
I think there are two huge implications of what's going on. The first is, I think we're going to get more cases of coronavirus. There was no social distancing, obviously, this weekend. But as far as Trump goes, I really do think that he is now in a fight for his presidency. The polls show him far behind. He didn't handle the virus well. He's not handling the urban riots well. And for him politically, he needs a lifesaver, an economy that's going to get stronger. Yet on this Friday, we're going to get an unemployment number that will be close to 20%. So everywhere you look, his options are limited.
Yeah, you mentioned the prospects of the economic recovery. That had been what the president had been pinning his hopes for re-election on. Talk a little bit more about what all these protests, the possibility of it potentially adding to a second wave of infection, what that could mean for the economic recovery.
Well, I think it means a lot of people who are not going to the beach are going to say, no thanks, I'm going to stay home this summer, not going to go out to malls, not going to go to restaurants because it's not over yet. And I do think that all this horrible sights we've seen on TV over the weekend, one of the most horrible sights is the fact that everyone is jammed in together. And I think just simple logic would argue that we're going to get a spike in new cases.
Are you surprised that we haven't seen Joe Biden visible as much as you might expect at a moment like this? I know his campaign posted something on social media where he had gone out to the site of the protest in Wilmington, Delaware. But, in terms of putting out a national message, we haven't heard much from Biden at this moment either.
Well, we saw a few things. On Friday, he was fairly visible, but you're right. This weekend, he was not. I mean, he does need to be more of a force to show empathy, to show leadership. Maybe it's the old adage, if my opponent is imploding, I'm not going to get in the way. I mean, there's something to that, I would think. But no, he needs to be more visible, and I predict he will.
Do you see this moving polling nationally or even in some of the battleground states as this unrest continues?
Absolutely. I'd say Trump is trailing by 10 points, roughly, in most of the polls. Still not too late. I mean, Hillary Clinton was leading by about 10 4 years ago when she lost. So it's not hopeless for Trump. But I would say, Nathan, right now, as of today, the Democrats will take the White House, the House, and the Senate. Got a long way to go. A lot can change, but I think there's been that big a change just in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
That's a pretty big statement here. So in our last 30 seconds, what do you see happening as we go through the summer? I mean, obviously, this has been a fiery start to the summer.
Absolutely, and I think that you have to talk about law and order. Just in D.C., where I live, Georgetown got trashed. Every place is getting trashed. You can't talk about police reforms and healing until you get law and order. And you're hearing that from the mayor of Atlanta and the mayor of Chicago, two African Americans who realize you've got to get some control before you move on to the next part of the agenda.
All right, Greg Vallier, thank you as always. Greg Vallier is Chief U.S. Policy Strategist at AGF Investments. Karen?
All right, Nathan, thank you. We're coming up to 5:55 on Wall Street. It's time for our daily Bloomberg Law Brief, exploring legal issues in the news, brought to you by American Arbitration Association. International trade or business dispute? Resolve faster with the International Center for Dispute Resolution, the leader in alternative dispute resolution around the world, ICDR.org. Today we look at election officials having just weeks to ensure states can handle a surge of mail-in votes come November. States soon need to decide to buy new equipment to help sort, verify, and count mail-in ballots if they can afford it, or rely on staff to manually handle the crush of incoming mail. For more on the challenges, Bloomberg's June Grasso speaks to Richard Briffault, a professor at Columbia Law School.
So, Rich, it's about 5 months until Election Day. What would state or local officials have to do now to allow voting by mail in November?
Well, there's a mixture of legal and practical things that they have to do. The legal issues remain in those states that still require some kind of excuse for voting, such as a disability or an illness or being away. Most states no longer require that, and a number of states were forced to suspend that by the courts during the primary season this year. But I think there are still a number of states where the law on the books, at least for now, says you need to have an actual illness or disability rather than just the presence of the COVID pandemic itself. So that's kind of one set of issues, is the legal authority to allow basically nearly all people to vote by mail. In the other states, and this is most of the states now, it is legal for people to vote by mail without having to have an excuse. The issues are really practical. Getting the ballots designed, because a mail-in ballot will look different from a ballot you see on a voting machine. Getting them printed, getting the envelopes, getting them stuffed, getting the machines that you need to count mail-in ballots, which are different from the machines that are normally used to count ballots that are cast at a polling place. Some states, and maybe I've even jumped over a step, in some states you may be eligible to vote by mail, but you may have to fill out an application. So what's the process for getting those applications to people and getting those applications back to the county clerk or whoever is in charge of voting locally? So vote by mail is somewhat more complicated. There are more steps to it than traditional polling place voting. And just the mechanics of it are going to be different. A number of states have done it very successfully, but they transition to it over several election cycles. And basically what's going to happen is there are a lot of states where that transition is going to have to be very fast.
And that's Richard Briffault, a professor at Columbia Law School, speaking of Bloomberg's June Grasso. Catch more of that interview, plus analysis of the latest legal news, by listening to the Bloomberg Law Show at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, or downloading the show at Bloomberg.com/podcasts. And attorneys can find exceptional legal research and business development tools at BloombergLaw.com. S&P futures down 10 points this morning. Dow futures down 67. NASDAQ futures down 57. And the 10-year Treasury is little change. Yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. The euro 1.1113 against the dollar. Bloomberg Daybreak continues. This is Bloomberg.
Influential. Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, pass to the 5, touchdown! Search Classic Game Replays to listen for free.
This is Mike Golick Jr. from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo, Dad, and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios, this is Bloomberg Daybreak for Monday, June 1st, 2020. Coming up this hour.
Protests hammer cities across the country following the death of George Floyd.
Violent clashes include vandalism, torch police cars, and thousands of arrests.
As tensions rise, President Trump meets with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials.
A 4th day of protests against police brutality kept New York City on edge. Plus, New Jersey will reopen sectors of the state from the coronavirus lockdown. I'm Michael Barr. More ahead.
I'm John Stashower in sports. NBA players react to the protests and a response to the baseball players as they try to make a labor deal with owners.
That's all straight ahead on Bloomberg Daybreak. On Bloomberg 1130 New York, Bloomberg 99.1 Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Bloomberg 960 San Francisco, Sirius XM 119, and around the world on BloombergRadio.com and via the Bloomberg Business app.
And good morning, I'm Karen Moscow.
I'm Nathan Hager. Bloomberg Daybreak is brought to you by Witham, a forward-thinking, technology-driven advisory and accounting firm helping clients be in a position of strength in today's modern business landscape. Visit witham.com to learn more.
U.S. futures are slightly lower to start the week, 6:01 on Wall Street, and we check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures are down 13 points, Dow futures down 91, NASDAQ futures down 65. No trading in Germany today. The CAC in Paris is up 0.9%, and so is the FTSE 100. 10-year Treasury, little change, yield 0.65%, yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1% or 36 cents at $35.14 a barrel. COMEX gold down 0.2% or $3.10 at $17.4860 an ounce. The euro 1.1114 against the dollar, the yen 107.61. This data check brought to you by SEI. Since its founding 50 years ago, SEI has provided investment managers and asset owners with robust infrastructure platforms and flexible outsourcing solutions. Go to SEIC.com/IMS. Nathan.
Karen, we're coming off the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. That's the sound of police in Minneapolis firing flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a 4th day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the city, interspersed with some violent clashes that included vandalism, torched police cars, and dozens of arrests. It was a similar scene in Boston. Peaceful rallies turned violent as protesters hit police with bottles, damaged vehicles, and looted stores throughout downtown Crossing and the Back Bay. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and Los Angeles, to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer.
At the same time in Washington,
no peace! No peace!
Chants of no justice, no peace, heard as part of demonstrations outside the White House. For the very latest, we bring in Amy Morris from our Bloomberg 99.1 Washington newsroom.
Angry protesters took over the streets of Washington, D.C. last night, some of them setting fires, vandalizing buildings and cars, and looting just blocks from the White House. Historic St. John's Church outside the White House was vandalized and set on fire. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser activated the National Guard. The Justice Department has now deployed the U.S. Marshals Service and agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration to supplement those National Guard troops outside the White House. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Daybreak.
All right, Amy, thank you. Unrest across the country took center stage on the Sunday talk shows.
Let's come together. Let's be prayerful, especially on a Sunday morning, about how we can put our differences aside, because this is the greatest country in the world, and we want to live up to the legacy of America.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on ABC's This Week, where we also heard from Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar.
We are living in a country that has a two-tiered justice system, and people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Omar says the latest examples of police brutality against African Americans are shocking but typical.
We are living in a country that has truly, for a long time, brutalized African Americans.
And President Trump's head of national security says the White House stands in solidarity with George Floyd. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien blames violent protests on Antifa, a loosely organized movement that is a frequent target of conservative critics.
It's the violent Antifa radical militants that are coming out under cover of night, traveling across state lines, using military-style tactics to burn down our cities. And they're especially targeting the most vulnerable parts of our cities.
Now, there were no public remarks from President Trump over the weekend, though he was active on Twitter, saying he'll label Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. He threatened protesters with tweets about vicious dogs and ominous weapons and blamed liberal governors and mayors for the unrest. The president plans to meet with Attorney General William Barr today before convening a teleconference with governors, law enforcement, and national security officials. There are currently no public remarks on the president's schedule.
The president's comments on Twitter are not helping the situation, according to D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
I think that the president has a responsibility to help calm the nation, and he can start by not sending divisive tweets that are meant to hearken to the segregationist past of our country.
Speaking on NBC's Meet the Press, Mayor Bowser singled out the president's tweet about vicious dogs as a reference to segregationists that let dogs out on women and children in the South. Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms also took issue with the president's comments. She spoke on Face the Nation from CBS.
What I'd like to hear from the president is leadership, and I would like to hear a genuine care and concern for our communities and where we are with race relations in America.
This week, Meet the Press and Face the Nation can all be heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio.
Now, despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight. Now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks. Futures this morning are lower, with S&P futures down 10 points, Dow futures down 70, NASDAQ futures down 56, and NYMEX crude oil at $35.14 a barrel. Straight ahead, we have the latest world and national news. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Karen, thank you. It is 6:07 on Wall Street, and Michael Barr has more on what's going on around the world. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. Thousands of people marched in New York City yesterday over the death of George Floyd. Many protesters and officers tried to keep the peace after days of unrest that left police cars burned and hundreds of people under arrest. However, last night, some stores were looted, including high-end stores in Soho. The NYPD believes violence has been deliberately stirred up by outside groups trying to hijack the protests. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo called for protesters to use common sense.
That violence never works. How many protests have we had? How many nights have we gone through like last night?
Over 30 NYPD officers were hurt over the weekend. Cuomo says the National Guard is on standby. Yesterday, thousands of people marched through multiple neighborhoods, chanting, kneeling in the street, and falling silent for a minute in front of the police station in Times Square to remember the people killed by police. Mayor Bill de Blasio says he has no plans to impose a curfew.
When you add up how many things were happening in how many places all over this city, it says something about New York City. It says something about the people of New York City. It says something about the NYPD, that thank God there was no loss of life. There were no major injuries.
De Blasio also reacted to a video of two police cruisers plowing into protesters in Brooklyn, saying, "I didn't like what I saw one bit." Among the hundreds of protesters arrested over the weekend was Mayor de Blasio's 25-year-old daughter. Chiara de Blasio was arrested for unlawful assembly with a group of protesters at 12th Street near Broadway. She was given a desk appearance ticket. The number of COVID-19 cases in New York State continues to decline. Governor Cuomo.
The net change in hospitalizations down again, intubations down again, number of new deaths still dropping.
There were 56 new deaths reported in New York State from the coronavirus. In New Jersey, more businesses in the state under lockdown can begin reopening soon. The governor said horse racing can begin as soon as next week, while child care centers can open on June 15th. In Connecticut, hair salons and barbershops are reopening today. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Thanks, Michael. 6:09 on Wall Street. Time for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashauer.
All right, Nathan, it's the start of a big week if baseball is to come to an agreement on how much players should make in a shortened season without fans. Last week was the owner's proposal, loudly panned by players who are now making their pitch back. The details do not sound like something that will lead to a deal. They want full pay for the games being played. They admit pay for those making $10 million a year or more can be deferred, but only if the postseason can't be played, and the payback should come with interest. They say if a player chooses not to play due to concerns about the virus, they should still get paid. They want more games, expanded playoffs for 2021 as well. They pitch ideas to make baseball more popular, like an off-season all-star game and players mic'd up during games. But if there are no games in 2020 because of money, baseball figures to become significantly less popular in the years ahead. Some athletes part of the weekend-long protest. The Celtics' Jaylen Brown drove 15 hours to his native Georgia to protest in Atlanta. Michael Jordan, for so long criticized for not speaking out about non-basketball issues, released a statement, said he's pained, saddened, and angry. Thabo Sefolosha of the Houston Rockets said George Floyd could have been him. Sefolosha in 2015 was wrongly attacked by New York police outside a Manhattan nightclub. They broke his leg. He sued, settled for $4 million. NASCAR, Bristol, Tennessee. The winner, just like last week, Brad Keselowski. That's because the leaders, Chase Elliott and Joey Logano, crashed with a lap to go. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Nathan?
And John, this would have been a big week in the sports world. In addition to the NBA and NHL playoffs, the final leg of racing's Triple Crown was supposed to have happened on Saturday, but for the coronavirus. Instead, the Belmont Stakes will be the Triple Crown's first race this year. It'll take place June 20th with no fans. The second week of the French Open would have had fourth-round matches, quarterfinals, semifinals, and the finals all this week. S&P futures lower by 8 points. Dow futures down 47. So are NASDAQ futures. You're listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
Hey, y'all. Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
If you have to drive, then it's more important than ever to watch your speed. As London starts to reopen, there are going to be more people on our streets. There'll be more people cycling, more people walking to work or to the shops. If you must drive, avoid the morning and evening peaks when the roads will be busier. We want the streets to be safe for everyone, all the time. So watch your speed. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
We're Cadent. Keeping you and our people safe is our main focus, and our vital work must continue. You'll start to see more of us in your area as we increase our work to upgrade the gas pipes to keep the energy flowing into your homes and businesses. We may need to come into your home to complete this work, but rest assured our engineers are following all government guidance on PPE and social distancing. We continue to provide the critical gas emergency service, and if you smell gas, call 0800 111 999. To all other key workers, we would like to say a big thank you from everyone at Cadent. Cadent, your gas network.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway, or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
People's Postcode Lottery's 30k a day is back. £30,000 will be won every single day by players in the July draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Visit postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 18th of June to play in the July draws. EPL managed lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
From Bloomberg Television, here's David Inglis.
The world is waiting and also watching as biotech companies are racing towards a coronavirus vaccine. Now, these companies face huge profits if they succeed, one of which, we're talking about Novavax, and have a look at the company's stock. Charge this one to hindsight, by the way. There we go. So the company's now started testing it on people, and the company has seen, as quite evidence here, it's quite a massive stock surge here. We spoke with the CEO, Stan Erck, earlier.
Like the other vaccine manufacturers, we are all going as fast as we possibly can. And this is, as U.S. government set up a warp speed program, we're using warp speed. If we go into, as I say, our expectation is we'll go into a phase 2 trial, but the phase 2 trial will be designed to be a phase 2/3, so that you can actually see efficacy. And the expectation is that we'll do it in multiple countries. We'll do it in Australia, U.S., and likely in a couple other countries in August. And by somewhere in the October-November timeframe, we would expect to be able to see efficacy. And that could lead governments, the FDA and EMA in Europe, to conclude that the vaccine might be deployable.
Hear more interviews like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app, or check your local cable listings. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. stock index futures are falling after Chinese officials told agriculture companies to pause imports of some American farm goods. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. S&P futures down 7.5 points. Dow futures down 48. NASDAQ futures down 45. European shares are climbing along with the euro, with the FTSE 100 is up 1.1%. The CAC in Paris is up 1.1%. And there's no trading in Germany today. 10-year Treasury down 1/32 yield 0.65%. Yield on the 2-year 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1.25% or 44 cents at $35.05 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.25% or $4.70 at $17.46.90 an ounce. The euro 1.1109 against the dollar. British pound 1.2383 and the yen 107.69. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now here's Michael Barr with more on what's going on around the world. Michael.
Karen, tens of thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets across America. Peaceful demonstrations yesterday against police killings of black people have been overshadowed by unrest that quickly ravaged cities from Philadelphia to Los Angeles. A truck driver drove into demonstrators in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died after a white police officer put his knee on his neck for more than 8 minutes. Outside the White House, police fired tear gas and stun grenades into a crowd who lit fires in a street. Thieves in more than 20 California cities smashed into businesses and ran off with cell phones and TVs. Atlanta's mayor says 2 police officers have been fired and 3 others placed on desk duty over excessive use of force during a weekend protest incident. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Nathan.
Okay, Michael, thanks. It's 6:19 on Wall Street, live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studios. This is Bloomberg Daybreak, and Jim Paulson is with us now, Chief Investment Officer at Leuthold Whedon Capital Management. It's interesting, Jim, as trading began overnight, investors appeared to be looking past all the unrest in the United States until that report came from Bloomberg News this morning that China is considering a pause on U.S. farm imports. What do you make of the market focus at this moment?
A lot of issues going on, Nathan. It's just unbelievable. But I really think that when you take the economy down, I don't know what GDP will be in the second quarter, but down 30% or 40% or who knows what the numbers will be, and the unemployment rate approaches 20%. The biggest thing in the room has got to be what's going on around the economy being turned off or being turned back on. And I really think that you look at all the issues that are going on right now, you wonder why the market is holding in here at all. But I think that's because there's such a big issue with the economy being turned back on. The virus curve has been bent nearly everywhere across the globe at the moment. And we're starting to see economic activities restart. Now they've been set back with the protests, but nonetheless, there's restart going on. And you can see the economic data starting to bounce here, and even in China, giving an early example of how fast it could bounce. And I think that's keeping a bit under this stock market, even though it's facing so many issues far beyond the shutdown of the economy to Chinese unrest and to American unrest across American cities. So I think it's still mostly about the economy going into a deep fall and coming back out of it.
Of course, a lot of this unrest is happening right at your doorstep. You're based in Minneapolis, and now with all these protests happening, it's raising the possibility that we could exacerbate the potential for a second wave of infection with protesters, particularly ones in some of the demographics hardest hit by this pandemic, getting out in close proximity. I mean, what does this mean for the potential for an economic recovery here?
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, we watch massive crowds that are abandon social distancing. There's no doubt about that going on. So I don't. It'll be hard to know what the impact of that will be down the road here, whether we'll have another virus outbreak. I also wonder if it's just seasonal a little bit here too, Nathan, where going into the summer, the virus calms down a bit. And we may be seeing that across the country right now, and maybe it'll come back in the fall. I would say this, though. I think that the hospital capacity and the ability of the country to respond to a respike in viruses again is much improved from what it was when it first showed up. And also, we know sort of where the lethality of this virus is among older individuals and those with health compromises, and I think we can be more protective of that and put a ring around that. So I really think we're better equipped at this point to handle a respike in virus. I'm not sure, while it wouldn't be good, I'm not sure it would necessarily completely shut down the economy again.
Are you advising your clients to do anything differently with their investments, given all the exogenous factors out there right now?
Well, I think there's two things that can be tilted on the bullish side here, primarily. Mm-hmm. There still is just a high level of fear, anxiousness, which tells me that there's a lot of portfolios that are underinvested in risk, overinvested in defensive assets like cash and bonds and gold. And that is typically a good thing for the stock market. Whenever you are in the midst of a recession, if you knew you were in a recession, it was almost always a good time to buy stocks. And whenever there's great fear about the future, they're probably discounting the more positive outcomes. And then we have just massive policy support, which just goes on unrelenting in the background, from monetary and fiscal stimulus to extremely low interest rates. I think you have to continue to remain tilted bullishly. So I think it's a barbell approach right now, and equity portfolios make sense. Stay with the new era kind of high growth companies, but on weak market days, add some more cyclicality, small cap, cyclical sector, and international stocks.
All right, Jim. Thank you as always, and stay safe, please. Jim Paulson is Chief Investment Officer at Leuthold Wheaton Capital Management, based out of Minneapolis. Futures this morning are moving lower, and you are listening to Bloomberg Daybreak.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Protests across the U.S. are throwing a wrench into plans to reopen following coronavirus-related shutdowns. Violence prompted companies from Apple to Amazon and Target to limit operations, while Chicago may delay reopening of businesses planned for Wednesday. The extra cost of police overtime and damages also deal another blow to already strained government finances. Demonstrations across U.S. cities followed the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Goldman Sachs is rolling back its pessimistic outlook for U.S. stocks brought on by the pandemic, giving up on its call for another steep sell-off. Strategists dialed back their prediction that the S&P 500 was slumped to the 2,400 level, more than 20% below Friday's close. They now see the current slump to hit 2,750 and say the S&P could even rally further to 3,200. Dow futures slightly lower to kick off the new month. Gina Cervetti, Bloomberg Radio.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
For the Jewish You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway, or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
This is a message from the government about the emergency measures to support the economy during the period of disruption caused by the coronavirus. To help you, your business, and your workers affected, you can apply for cash grants, business rate holidays, statutory sick pay relief packages, as well as the coronavirus job retention and self-employment income support schemes. For information, go to gov.uk/business-support now.
At Lloyds Bank, we know that money is a concern for a lot of people during this time.
I'm really worried about the business. I'm worrying about you. And I think that's changing me. And I'm worried that somewhere along the line you might not love me anymore.
Oh, that's not true. Whatever's playing on your mind at the moment, Lloyds Bank, in partnership with Mental Health UK, can offer you support and advice. Visit lloydsbank.com/mentalhealth.
The NHL is always on the ice with these awesome hockey podcasts on TuneIn. Get your goal with the Spittin' Chicklets podcast.
Brian Yandel, Keith Yandel, thanks for coming on. What's going on?
Nothing much. Glad to be here. You guys got some nice digs here.
We heard you took Southwest 2-stop flight to get out here.
Yeah, well, just...
Carve up the ice with NHL at the rink.
The other day I wrote a story. Artemi Panarin, Semyon Varlamov, Sergei Bobrovsky, they all helped arrange for the purchase of N95 masks to benefit hospitals in their respective markets. This is another one of those positive stories you're seeing.
Or create your own power play with Locked On NHL.
All these teams invested future assets to take a run at the Stanley Cup right now. Like, all of those teams would have a real serious gripe, like trading these multiple first-round picks to make a run at a cup. You're right.
Discover these and more NHL podcasts right here on TuneIn. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
It's 6:30 on Wall Street. Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. We are just about 3 hours away from the opening of U.S. trading. Let's get you up to date in the news you need to know at this hour. U.S. futures are lower after the 6th day of protests in cities across the country. Police in Minneapolis fired flashbangs last night to disperse protesters after the city's curfew went into effect. Meantime, in New York City, demonstrations continued for a 4th day. There were peaceful demonstrations across the country, interspersed with violent clashes. Demonstrators took to the streets in dozens of cities, including Chicago and L.A., to protest the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer.
Chicago planned to lift coronavirus restrictions this week, but that may be delayed now due to the protests. Demonstrations are adding to what's already a tense environment in many parts of the country. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker.
We have communities all around the state that are desperately trying to recover from the damage that this virus has done. And I'm imploring people to not force a difficult second rebuilding on our small businesses in the course of expressing your very justified pain.
Chicago was set to start reopening Wednesday. Now, Mayor Lori Lightfoot is consulting with officials to reconsider the plan.
Despite the protests, U.S. futures had been gaining overnight. Now they're lower after a Bloomberg News exclusive on the state of trade relations between the U.S. and China. Sources say the Chinese government is telling state-run agriculture companies to pause purchases of U.S. farm goods. The move is said to be tied to Beijing evaluating the ongoing escalation of tensions over Hong Kong.
At the same time, China is accusing the U.S. of undermining bilateral relations and, quote, disregarding facts when it comes to Hong Kong. President Trump last week moved to rescind the city's special trading status. China says the measure would gravely interfere with China's internal affairs. Beijing says any words or actions that hurt China's interests will be met with firm counterattacks.
And again, futures are lower this morning with S&P futures down 7.5 points, Dow futures down 42, NASDAQ futures down 49. No trading in Germany today. The FTSE 100 is up 1.1%, and the CAC in Paris up 1.2%. 10-year Treasury, little change, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year, 0.16%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.9%.